Okay.
There it is. Not sure what they want to answer those questions, but there they are. The Molly's not with us. She's not get someone watch leave, so I'm going to have to be the man behind the curtain. Let me catch up, get everything on for that.
Did this really come from Paul, or was it from Melanie?
I know. It came through the machine that sends me messages.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say it came from Paul.
But Melanie's aware of it, because I had mentioned it to her.
You were at the climate conference.
I was at the climate conference, yeah. It's my 16th one, which may be a confession of mental illness, but Dubai is, your first impression of Dubai as a place is a lot of good infrastructure here. But the conference was, it was, good. They supposedly going to transition away from fossil fuels. I won't be holding my breath on that one. We'll see.
Yeah.
It was
I guess more productive than the last couple, maybe.
maybe. I mean, it's supposed to be the global stock take, which is required for the Paris Agreement of 2015. And the global stock take, as far as I can tell, is what are called the nationally determined contributions that all the countries made. Most of them have not been fulfilled since 2015. The United States, strangely enough, is well on the path to doing so, but most of the rest of the world is not. The EU is, but so the stock take was, well, we made a bunch of promises and we didn't really keep them, but maybe we'll do better next time.
Sounds like most climate initiatives.
Sorry?
I said that sounds like most climate initiatives.
It does sound like that. The other thing I confess is I was actually at the Earth Summit, so I've been following this for 30-some years now. So. Anyway, on the other hand, being on airplanes for 18 hours is always fun.
Oh, yeah.
And working for a nonprofit, which basically said, please, can I get premium economy?
What did they say?
They finally agreed. They could afford the extra $100.
How you doing, Jeff?
Oh.
Is there anything we need to make sure to discuss before 5:30?
Yeah, I'm working on it now. I did talk to Eric Hammond about having, when they were printed out, have descriptions of the materials, depending on how precise you want to be in motion. If it'll, let me see that. Let me have those opened up, then I can. I also want to ask you some questions while we have an opportunity.
While he's doing that, I have just a theoretical question. We're 1 year away from completing the first quarter of the 21st century. At what point does the phrase turn of the century stop meaning 18th or 19th to 20th?
It's just going to be going old, man.
Yeah, right. Well, and I ask because, in my homework, the district's been referred to as the corner since the turn of the century. Now, Grant says with increased train traffic on the tracks, blah, blah, blah. But back to the question.
Yeah.
And I think that's what most people think of when they hear that phrase, but
At least you. Now,
Is there-
MC Hammer is going to.
It starts to change to mid-century. My neighbors are like, "There's two metal
There you go. I mean, that's kind of what I mean. It's like, was there such a phrase?
Oh my gosh.
I think it's probably should be ditched already.
I debated wearing jeans, but I'm glad I
Hi,
didn't. 'cause
hi.
Sorry, I didn't see anything on the.
Howdy.
at 5. No.
There are a few questions. We're kind of waiting for some quorum. Decided
I was walking
not
and
a
David
large
was right
team.
across the street, looking at bricks.
Breaks.
Bricks.
Not much to see.
James, I had a sort of similar thought, and just the fact that like we've always been saying, 50 years is the cutoff, or what's considered historic. It's now the 70s.
Yeah.
Trying like how you see avocado green, that carpeting on
That's
the.
So that's historic, you know.
So I just
My
I had
parents'
some.
house is historic.
I just bought an avocado green Olivetti typewriter from my daughter from the 70s. It's pretty sweet. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's probably historic. I would consider it historic. even though
You
it's from the
designate
70s.
it individually protected.
Yeah, I would say so.
All typewriters.
Yeah, I think they all are now, aren't they? I don't know why she wanted a typewriter. It was bizarre, but I'm like, well, if you're gonna get a typewriter, I'm gonna get you a good one.
That's great.
On the Lexington and High Street project, there's talk of Taylor Walk and the Taylor House. Do we know which house? Does anyone know which house was the Taylor
It's,
house?
Anthony Bernard's house, but it's over on Beach Street. It's not in the,
It comes up in this, I'm gonna read this correspondence into the
I saw
record,
an
so.
address of 534 Taylor Street when I tried to figure out which house it was, but I can't find it on the map of which.
yeah, it's, look up, what's Anthony's last name?
Stretch.
Let's see.
I don't think it was even around.
So it's actually over on 8th Street?
There's your report.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we got this.
You get it?
It's Taylor Walk, like a pencil line street.
I need to remember not to roll back. So take the whole table with me.
So there were so many emails that were flying around, just related to the conversation on the different districts. I think what the plan is that we're gonna take stock of kind of where we are time-wise, when we get to that, and set some kind of parameter around how much discussion we wanna have, and I'll take friendly suggestions at that point, we'll see. But we wanna give it enough time to get it all out on the table, but not so much that we have too much conversation or get too long-winded. I don't think we will.
The intro to each district.
Yes.
Just sit back with it.
Yeah. You sit on the floor.
That's all right.
Just plug it in for now, let it warm up.
I doubt that you had a chance to see it, Jeff, but did you see my
I
homework?
printed it, even printed it out, but I hadn't cleaned it.
All right, was that completely stupid of me?
Oh, no, all of your materials?
Oh my God, that's the first one.
Paper copy that doesn't have the notes on it, that would work.
You didn't have to show it to everybody. I just didn't hear it. I mean, it's.
Well, we can use this as our.
Your start. This is my homework.
The rugby.
Can I get at least?
Fourth grade
Wow.
usurper Preston neighborhood, 14th Street. It's a big section.
Ridge Street was nothing. I was walked up and down. That was
No, no,
really interesting though.
that's Jeff's
Never
fault. I
walked that
wasn't
street.
planning on having it passed around.
I feel like I learned something.
Just trying to show
get continuous sidewalks on that one?
Jeff did it.
Oh, wow, what's this?
I know, that's what I said.
Gosh, putting us to shame.
Teacher's
Well, wait till
pet.
you read it.
We're just impressed that you handed it in early. And I'm trying for Jeff to make it.
Well done.
Let me, just one of the things, I had thought about discussing via our boards at the beginning of the meeting, table that for later and kind of talk about it later. Last night, James, Ron, and Roger were all reappointed to the BAR. So we are still short a business owner or owner of a business in a sign control district, includes ADC districts, IPP, and AC districts. So, get the word out for that. When we discussed the courts this evening, you know, I know there's been a lot of conversation, but I had a good conversation yesterday with their camp. The critical decision for them for lead time is the gray. That's where they really have a lot of long lead times. So I think
Is the, sorry, the gray.
the gray,
Okay.
there is gray elements.
Yeah.
So that's like a, I don't know where you all would take a risk discussion, but if the gray is good, that they definitely need that. Another thing, just, and I know saying it, I'll have to repeat it, but we, are being a certified local government. Every year I have to prepare a report on our activity, and it goes September to October. And that includes updating any training that you all have done. You only have to do an hour, and so it has to be prior to October 1st of this year. It's, I mean, I think James once wrote down that he read the Secretary of Standards. So, but it's a, they haven't challenged me on it yet, but we have not always had everyone complying with that. So I'll send out another reminder, but that has to be completed. I have to send that in by the end of January.
That would mean October this past year.
Mhm.
Right, okay.
So like September 2022, or October 22 through September 2023.
I did a Preservation of Virginia signage thing. There you go.
And I had a couple questions on, that have come in this week. I can ask now, I can ask later. But are there any questions about what's on the agenda that I might need to look up ahead of time? Anything I can help you all with?
Well, the awards was the one question I had, because I knew that with all the other stuff going on, it got kind of pushed to the back. And I
That's
don't-
okay.
And so we may or may not discuss it, or,
Well, my preference was to not discuss it on Channel 10, because I felt like that, you know, I don't want someone to go, oh, they didn't vote me in, you know.
yes.
You know, it's not inappropriate for you all to discuss privately, so, I figured that would make more sense. And it doesn't have to be done this year. The items on the agenda tonight, there's the consent agenda item at, 112 Park Street. Then there's the discussion about the City County Courts expansion at Levy, discussing the color palette. Then there's the discussion of the requested tent on West Main. And I'll say, I know there's a lot of information that I provided, in some ways you could say, for just a tent, but tents are not the simplest thing that I've had to deal with. There's really no ordinance on tents. So there's the code requirements of, you know,
There's
a certain,
canopy language.
yeah,
And
it's,
awnings.
yeah, but, and it's really if it's like as long as it's of a certain size, the fire marshal inspects it and stuff like that. But so the reason I have a lot of information in there is that we're sort of the deciding body on these things. There's nothing else to look to
other than what the BAR has discussed and produced. So that was a little explanation of why there's so much stuff in there. And then there is the informal preliminary discussion about 915 East High Street. We are not required by code to have preliminary discussions for projects in conservation districts, but given the scale of this, I thought I urged the applicant to do this. I think that it's, I don't know where we'll be when we get to that in the evening, but I think it's perfectly fine for you all to say, we're gonna allocate, X minutes to this. I've suggested to the applicant that they come in sort of prepared to talk and ask questions and not, we don't need to be told about the project, the information is here. But again, to emphasize that it's in a conservation district, the design guidelines, depending on how you look at them, can be, they can allow a whole lot of interpretation, or they may, you can look at them very narrowly. The only example of a project that in a conservation district of this scale that you all reviewed was the Tarleton Oak project back in 2018. And I'll admit that was my first couple months, and I sort of stumbled my way through it. But did you have any questions on that project, or what's the goal of that discussion, or how you should treat it?
I think we just encourage them to have a brief presentation. We talk about especially the big items of concern, and if they have any particular questions they want some initial feedback on.
Right, and as I said to them, and I put it in the staff report, to me, the three primary questions were that height at the northern end. You may agree or disagree. The other is some sort of break in that long wall. I just don't know necessarily where. And then there was, while this is not replicating and not intended to replicate anything in the Martha Jeff neighborhood, we do have the character defining features that the neighborhood did identify. So, how those might be incorporated or not. But that's why that's in there. And then at the beginning of the meeting, we can have the election of the chair and vice chair. You all can dive into it immediately, or we can have the new people start in January after hazing and initiation. I'll leave that to you.
Do people want to start today?
And let's see, what time is it? So, on any of those, did you have any questions for me? Because I can jump to a couple of the questions I have for you.
So back to the tent, which I noticed is not up, but there is a tent up at the Park Social, which I assume we haven't gotten an application for. It's about the same as in the photos.
They put one up every winter.
Yeah.
I just wondered,
I don't know which.
next to Public Seafood, and Public Seafood also has one in that space.
They've had one.
And Maya has one up.
Maya is not.
Maya's is down.
Oh, is it down?
Yeah, there's nothing in there when I drove by.
Okay.
Of course, this is the one that's yours right next to it, but
Right.
neither of them had any kind of tent awning, anything else. But I guess my question was the awnings, the canopies. I mean, there's not much in here, but does that at all apply to tents? It seems like an awning is sort of like a tent with the sides rolled up.
I've got, for example, in front of Random Road Brewery, they've got like the little 10-foot pop-ups. I don't know. I know that in front of a contributing structure or an IPP, or at least one West Main, a contributing structure, the BAR's discussions in 2013 concluded that they recommend they not be allowed. Anything that is non-contributing is they come in, they get a permit, but I don't review that other than to say it's not contributing, so the BAR doesn't have purview. Sort of like demolition of a non-contributing structure. I think that there are enough questions swirling about this, and that's why I said in the report. at what point do we treat these like additions, where you apply, I mean, if it's, you know, up 360 days a year, it comes down for 5, we might as well, and this is what the guys in zoning have suggested, you know, you might as well recommend that they build something, you know, a pavilion, and just do it and leave it up.
We did that in the past. I mean, that's how,
Little Star.
Black Cat and Black Cat too. Black Cow, rather.
Black Cow, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So, that was kind of if it was gonna be a semi-permanent feature, BAR was, did try to encourage permanent construction, but at the same time,
That's
I
why
don't wanna see these tents go away, because I kind of appreciate walking home at night, and it's like people are sitting out there.
I mean, there is a building science component to this. I mean, having designed tents and permanent shelves, canopies, there's a really significant difference in the kind of planning and engineering that goes into a permanent structure versus a temporary structure. And I don't think it's that fuzzy of a boundary. It really would be informed by by building code. But we should tease that out.
So, the two angles on this, one would be, I think, and maybe the best route is approve it with conditions and precise time, if so, you know, and back when Lisa was here, we were talking about tents, I said, we can establish a timeline, it's reasonable. And it, you know, it used to be that seasonal tent was during that winter period, and then it came down. But it is something to think about and look at and discuss and understand. I think, I don't know, I'm of two minds. It's said in the report, it's removable, but yet it's there, and and we have to account for it. So
During the pandemic, when, was our, I guess, public policy sort of to ease up on enforcement of that? Is that sort of what happened? And
So during that time, Craig Fabio and I actually wrote out, you know, pulling kind of a Frankenstein monster of, all right, under these circumstances and with these conditions, and we put it out there, the city manager signed it, and we had 2 tents on the mall, so it was sort of after all that, no one will let us, still only a couple of people did it. But I do think there's, you know, for example, I said to my boss the other day, I wish we could figure out how to activate the roofs of our buildings. You know, like the Commonwealth Bar here, what's wrong with them using that, you know, that roof that's,
they plan to.
yeah, and so I do think it's worth revisiting and thinking it through, but if we're gonna recommend to someone, you know, do it permanently, you know, to have that as part of our policy, but, I don't know if you wanna get into it tonight, except for to make, when you have something like this, where you possibly will make an exception, then in that discussion and in the motion, that specificity is necessary just to so it stays inside a box. It doesn't become just about anything. What are the circumstances that you would allow this and the conditions you would put on it?
I mean, I think it's like, this is an example, the awnings and canopies, marquees
Well,
really doesn't apply to it.
Let's,
You know, you wouldn't just drive
if
into
can we stick a pin in that and come back to it? Go ahead and get started. All right, everyone. Welcome to this last monthly meeting of this 2023 for the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. We have a few items on the agenda. Staff will introduce each item, followed by the applicant's presentation, which shouldn't exceed 10 minutes. We'll then ask for any questions from the public, followed by questions from the BAR. After the questions are closed, the chair, me, will ask for comments from the public. You'll be allowed 3 minutes to ask questions, 3 minutes to offer comments. And please identify themselves, and here's my regular reminder to speak into the microphones. We do have people following along online. Comments should be limited to the BAR's purview, that is, regarding the exterior aspects of the project. Following our discussion and prior to taking action, the applicant will have up to 3 minutes to respond. Okay, tonight, the first item on the agenda are matters from the public for those things that are not on the agenda, or if anyone wishes to speak to the consent agenda, which tonight is the approval of a exterior deck at 1112 Park Street. Are there anyone from the public? Anyone online? Nope. Okay. The next item is our annual election of a chair and vice chair.
Did
And
you just ask, you didn't just approve the consent agenda, did you?
no, that's
Oh, okay.
that's item B. Or
Sorry.
item A1.
Yeah, I heard you mention the process.
We will get there. We are to elect on an annual basis our chair and vice chair, and as I mentioned before, while I will be on the board next year, I am stepping down from being a candidate, and so I open it up to the board for any nominations.
So I think I was the nominating committee this year and approached two people who have agreed to stand for us nominating them. James Emer has agreed to be our chair, and Tyler has agreed to be our vice. And I didn't poll the rest of the board on that, but hopefully everybody is pretty much on board with that selection. I think I'd made it pretty well known that I wasn't climbing up the ladder to chair, so I felt it necessary to fill some seats. And I think James and Tyler will be really great.
I agree. Why don't we vote for acclamation?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Congratulations
any
and
stepping down?
condolences.
Well, excellent. And then I guess we'll follow up with the question: would you like to sit in run the meeting tonight, or you want to wait till January?
I think I'd rather wait till January. Then we've got a nice clean start with 2024.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm super excited. I think we have not only good candidates, but a great board, and I'm glad that also we can confirm that we had Roger and Ron and who else got renominated? James got renominated. So we have a good consistency and a good working group headed into next year. So it's very exciting.
For the record, the officers of the BAR include the secretary, and some of you asked me about that earlier, maybe in November, but per your bylaws, that essentially it's, my boss, if he chooses to be, or delegating it, and it's sort of the committee of me, Patrick, and Molly serving as the secretary, and that is preparing the agenda, preparing the minutes, keeping the minutes, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't get to vote on that.
I would note that our bylaws don't have the following position, but our new chair has agreed to continue to serve as a social chair. Of course, Ron Bailey usurped him for a month
Which is fine and acceptable.
on the social events, but but he'll be a social chair and a presiding chair too.
Maybe cruise director.
Right.
Excellent. Okay, next item on the agenda tonight is the consent agenda. As I mentioned, it's the approval of an exterior rear deck on 1112 Park Street. Do I hear, and it's the only item on the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second,
All right, any discussion? No.
the applicant.
All in favor?
You might as well tell her. Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is 350 Park Street, the county courts.
So, let me, Molly gave me all this stuff to take care of, so.
I think you can interrupt.
Hear that?
Do you want
Sharon, we moved you to the end of the meeting?
So we approved your project just now
You're all done.
with no discussion, so
Yes. You're welcome to stay, but
you're welcome to stay, but enjoy your evening, yes.
Sherman,
That's who's been bringing, Tim's been pinging me, so, all right, got it all squared away. So this is, as we discussed back at the November meeting, this is a request for the courts expansion project at the Lee site, 350 Park Street. And for folks who aren't up to speed on it, we had approved the design in August 2022, omitting the color palette, essentially the brick selection and the color gray that's going to be applied to certain elements on the building. So at the November meeting, Mr. Ampman and the design team presented samples of the gray color. They had brick samples, and this brick panel has been at the site for several weeks. And we had phrased it back in 2022 that this would come back and be approved as a COA. So that's fine. And but I don't really have much to offer. You all have looked at it, reviewed it. I think I laid out in the staff report that I know there were some questions about what had been previously reviewed, et cetera, but it seemed that we had started in August 2022, really had decided we're gonna look at samples and determine what the color palette will be. So, and now if you have a problem with this and its compatibility with the building and the historic district, certainly understand that. But but the fact that it differs from what we had discussed 2 or 3 years ago, that's not the question before you all. So, Mr. Ampman is here. I think Steve is available online if necessary. Let me see.
Mr. Ampman?
I don't see him, but Mr. Ampman can certainly, if you have any questions or Mr. Chair, it's yours.
Hi, Eric Ampman, DGP Architects, Charlottesville, Virginia. Jeff gave a pretty great summary, and I presented it last month. It was a matter before the public at the time, but now we're back with the formal COA. So I'm really here just kind of to answer questions or give a quick recap. It's all Taylor brick. The lower part, which is below the water table, is wire cut, so it's a little bit rougher. And a blend of 2 colors, the red and the Patriot is 15% brown blended in. And then above the water table, which isn't built into the mock-up, but where you can see the brick changes, also Taylor brick 317 red smooth. So it's the same color, just looks a little lighter because it's smooth instead of wire cut. All the other metal samples on top of the wall are either pre-finished for the window systems or the security windows, or paint for things that are metal that need to be painted, such as the columns or the parapet caps. And then also the GFRC and cast stone are a complementary gray color to match. If you have any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the public or from anyone online? And just holler at us if there are questions from the board.
No one online? Or no questions online?
What's the mortar color?
I don't know the name, sorry, but it's in the mock-up panel. It's slightly red. So we were doing that instead of like a buff color to distinguish it from the historic structure next to it. So it's different but complementary.
Other questions from the board?
and I had sent a question to Jeff a couple weeks ago. So what's the purpose in having just one monochromatic color above the water line, water
Yeah.
table?
There's no
Is it
cost
cost?
there's no cost savings involved. It's all the same manufacturer. It's all above the water table, smooth brick, so it's not a cost issue. It was an aesthetic decision. We looked at some other colors to be blended in and felt that, this was the way to go. Historic brick is not a blend of different brick colors. So the color range results from being in different positions in the kiln. So slightly different temperatures creates slightly different colors. The salmons are usually on the inside, towards the inside of the pile of bricks where it's a little bit cooler. They don't bake quite as much at quite a highest temperature. The blacks and the purples are the ones that are furthest to the outside. They're the hardest. They get the darkest, and kind of in between is where you get the reds and the browns. So sometimes that effect is attempted to be simulated by taking manufactured brick, which are much more uniform, and sort of blending the colors to kind of create that look. We felt that was appropriate below the water table where we were going for a heavier, darker tonal color. Just decided not to do it above.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the? Okay, we'll move to comments. Comments from the public, if there are any, and comments from the board.
No one is requesting comment?
I'll start. Walking again once again in Court Square, I was struck again by how so many of those historic structures are very consistent in their brick color, and when comparing it against the panel that was supplied, I think the top portion, which has been a subject of conversation, actually, I think is in many ways more consistent with the district than the below the water table. If, for instance, the brick pattern below the water table were what was proposed, it would be significantly different than its context, for better or worse. It would be very different. I feel that this is fully in keeping with the spirit of the project, and I think we're going to have differences of opinion on this board. I feel like this is within the realm of aesthetic preference, and probably not something that our guidelines would say is either acceptable or not acceptable. So I would urge approval of the submittal as given. But I welcome healthy debate, and others may feel differently on that.
I also walked around Court Square, and I agree with Breck in terms of the brick, that there are a lot of.
Distinguish this.
Yes. There is a lot of, I guess monochromatic might be the right word, brick color in a lot of the buildings. I think where I'm struggling some is with the mortar color. I think most of the buildings in the Court Square district have a buff color, as Mr. Ammon pointed out. The Levy building itself, if I'm not mistaken, I think looks like it's had a red wash, and so that's giving it that appearance of sort of the whole wall is red. And I also don't necessarily think the Levy building's a great example of fine brickwork. And so that's I guess just where I'm struggling. I'm actually okay with the brick as submitted. I'm wondering if coloring the mortar to match the brick is really the right answer here, in keeping with the district. I understand the intent to try and differentiate, and kind of if there's a concern of, oh, well, if we made the buff mortar, then we're trying too much to try and match the historic buildings. But I think the design of the building itself is a clear departure from the historic buildings in the district, and so I don't think somebody's going to accidentally think it's an old building. And I also think the smoothness of the brick lends itself to that modernity that they're looking for. So that's my one comment, is I'd prefer to see maybe a more buff or lighter mortar color.
Other comments? Mr. Whitney?
I think the sample as submitted is approvable. I looking at buildings in the neighboring context, I think the roughness of the differentiation below the water table, I think fits with some of the neighboring site walls. But agree, I wouldn't want to see the darker brick mixed in across the whole face. And think that the monochromatic above the water table will fit nicely with some of the neighboring context, and think it'll be a good addition on the project. Yeah, no issues with approving it as submitted for me.
I just took a look at the guidelines, and there really isn't much in the way, for masonry on new construction. Really no guidance at all. And just a note for the many, many things, one more thing that we need to do when we look at our guidelines, but it's a lot about repairing and maintaining current masonry and brick. So,
Yeah, it's essentially, is it appropriate and complementary?
yeah, which just means it's aesthetic. So I think I would tend to agree that a more neutral color instead of red. The mortar, I as many times as this is just across the street from me, as you know, so I happen to walk by it more than probably other people on the board, but I haven't really noticed that the mortar was reddish before. It doesn't read that to me.
So just to respond to that, since
Yeah.
it's been mentioned twice now, Mr. Zemer's correct. The Levy Building did have a red wash on it originally, which is sort of like lime, but red instead of white,
Yeah.
which was actually kind of a common treatment at the time. The Eagle Tavern also had the same thing. Hasn't been redone in so long that it's based on Court Square, on the south side of Court Square. It's just basically washed off. So we're not trying to simulate that effect. However, the intent of those kinds of historic treatment was to make the brick appear more monolithic and less unitized, where there was a real color contrast difference between the brick and the joining. So it made a more, I'm going to say, stone-like with like heavy air quotes on it.
Right.
So not trying to mimic that, but with the smoother face of the brick with a sharper edge to the brick, and then a closer color tone in the mortar. The intent is to do something different that's not quite so much like cream-colored mortar, red brick. It's intentionally being different to appear more monolithic as a surface rather than sort of a unitized assembly of small parts. It's a subtle effect, but that's the intent. So there was purpose behind it. There was an idea. It's not just, let's do a different color. So there was an idea to have an aesthetic effect. And, different is good. You can walk around new construction all over downtown. Very prominent building at the south end of the mall that's made of thin brick, panelized with metal dividers, like not historic, right? So this is just different.
Was there an intention to the color, or where did the color selection come from? What was the process
For brick or mortar?
for the brick?
Well, again, red brick being sort of complementary, but then also a little bit different, and we were going for a little bit of a range in the lower water table, combined with the texture being rougher, to again suggest rustication, and then a smoother, more monolithic appearance above, which again is sort of a reference to base, middle, top of classical architecture without being literal.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't here last time, but I'm assuming the striations that are shown in the renderings, those are no longer happening.
Oh, no,
They are.
they are. So the coursing and the Norman brick length as opposed to modular here, and then the 1/3 head joint pattern as previously approved in a COA.
Okay.
You just can't get the full range of colors available in the Norman brick size. So the panel was built with the standard size brick.
Okay. And the panel wasn't built with it looks like on the rendering that is there a differentiation in the face of the striations? Is there a-
Yeah, there is. So that's correct. It wasn't built with that. I think it's 5-to-1, so 5 courses of brick and then 1 recessed. I may have the exact number not quite right, but that is correct as drawn. So the geometry is correct as what was approved last summer.
Okay. I don't have any problem with the mortar color, especially given your explanation.
Just muddy the waters a little bit. I guess I'm going to abstain from this because somehow I have skipped out on every single discussion we've had on this project. I mean, just my only comment would be, I do, the kind of polka dot effect on the base, where you've just got 2 colors of brick and you're interspersing a darker one periodically. I would rather see either a more of a range where you use like a flash brick, which, I mean, that's what they call it when they kind of artificially toast the brick, I think, or am I using the wrong term?
It is the flashings, not artificial. Again, that's resulting from the historic process when the bricks are stacked basically in like a beehive pattern. They're sort of like a cone, and they're stacked like this, so they're touching each other. That affects how the heat from the kiln gets to the brick, and where the bricks are touching, you get a different color. And so that's why the flashing is like irregular, because the bricks are stacked in different ways.
I guess I would, if you're going to use a variation of tones on the base, I would rather see something like that. But you also have that rustication you're doing, which I guess to me it almost seems like I don't understand. I would almost rather not see the kind of polka dot effect happening. But again, I'm not going to vote on this. I just always have to get my 2 cents in. But I mean, generally, yeah, I think it's not a big deal. I would probably still vote to approve.
I would vote to approve as submitted.
Want to take a stab at a
Is that
motion?
Well, we have one right here.
Okay.
All right. Let's see, so, having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including the ADC district approval design guidelines, I move the proposed material palette, including the colors of brick and trim, for the city county courts expansion project at the Levy site satisfies BAR's criteria and is compatible with the North Downtown ADC district, and that the BAR approves the application as submitted.
Seconded.
Do we have any discussion?
I guess the specifications of the brick and the mortar will be part of the record documents, correct?
Sure.
Just want to make sure, because that's why I asked about, could those be presented? I just want to make sure they're in the record somewhere, so thank you.
That was the piece of paper I gave to Jeff on the way in, minus the mortar specs, so I have to provide that.
We just didn't see it, sorry.
Okay. I will call the vote. Mr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mr. Timmerman?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Can abstain?
Okay. Mrs. Lewis?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. The motion carries.
Thank
Thank
you
you, and appreciate the extra, the time allotted to allow us to see this sample in person.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Eric, have a good holiday. Let me clear the deck, folks, and then,
Okay. So, the next item on the agenda is 625 West Main Street, seasonal tent at Mariscos El Barco.
and as soon as I catch up with you, I will give the intro. So, excuse me, this is a COA request for property at 625 West Main Street. It is currently the El Barco restaurant. The request is for a seasonal tent to be installed in the front patio. The reason this is before you all is because the building is a contributing structure in the West Main ADC district. It was originally a single-story service station built in 1935. The second story was added in the 1970s. And then there were a lot of alterations to it in the 1970s and 1980s. I'm sorry, the second floor was added in the 70s and 80s. It had been a non-contributing property, but when the district was established in 1996, but in a 2013-2014 review of the design guidelines, the structure was included as contributing. So therefore, that's why it's here. So there have been some questions of, yes, there have been some tents had gone up there in past years. A lot happened during COVID, as we discussed earlier, but some had happened when this was non-contributing. So, in the request, I have a 30-foot by 60-foot. I don't think the 30-foot's correct, but given the space there in front, our design guidelines recommend against locating tents in front of contributing structures. So that's, from the guidelines, that's about all we have. We have seen, certainly since COVID and during COVID, a lot of interest in outdoor dining, and we have seen businesses, being outside is important to them. And some of this is a carryover. I think some of this is an indication to me West Main Street is becoming a busier place than it had been. So while the guidelines as a recommendation recommend against in front of contributing structures, I think that under the circumstances, and that being we are in the winter, this would be a seasonal tent, and that you all, and this is guidance that the BAR was given back in 2013 by counsel, legal counsel, that you all can apply limits to the period at which a tent is up, and including, and there are some recommendations here about conditions that somewhat come from the guidelines, but that, it's a single color, no signage, no logos, but anything that you all felt might need to be added. Now, I will say I spoke with the restaurant manager a year ago, and I had urged them to look at a space on the side where they have parking, and there's space in the rear of the parking. I realized that takes away from parking, but that was a suggestion. And just to carry from our earlier discussion, the challenge here is that at what point does a recurring tent, seasonal tent, however, go up, come down, go up, come down, that we essentially should treat it as a permanent addition. And then you would apply the guidelines for new construction and addition, which somewhat obviously more stringent. But that would be one idea that we certainly can discuss at a later date. And I think the remedy would be, if you all are inclined to approve this, is to establish a time limit at which it must come down. My recommendation would be through graduation. You certainly can ask the applicant if they have something else in mind. And but otherwise, if you all were to deny this, it is a request. In an event of a denial, the applicant can appeal that to the city council. So, do you have any questions for me on this? I don't know if Walter is, let's see. I do not see him signed in, so,
Okay. Well,
we did have some language, a language barrier, so I hopefully I was communicating, Molly and I have been communicating, but I don't know.
were you under the impression he was going to join?
That was interesting. Are you here for this? Okay, yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, good.
Would you like to speak to the project?
I speak just a little bit. My English is not good.
can I'm sorry, can I ask you to speak at the podium, just so, because if anyone's online, they can hear us? Thank you.
Sorry. Hi. My name is Irma. I am the new manager at the Mariscos El Barco. I have just 1 week the manager, so I am new. Well, I'm coming for the carp for the patio. I really be needing for it's rain, that one it's cold and everything, and we have customers coming with the whole family, with the pets or with dogs or anything, and we not got the pets inside the restaurant, so we need the carp for for him, and it's more good for the we have more space for more customs. That one December it's very down the bends, and I really we need yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll have we'll have time for questions first, and then
Sure.
time for comments, and we may ask you some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So questions from the public, please just let me know if there are any questions from the board.
No one online.
My question is, what months out of the year do you need the tent?
We have with the carp, I think the November, October, November, and it's good. But in the time, the hot time, and is July and August. It's fine. We don't need it, but it's hot. But this time we need in the carp just for the cold and the rain. Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Would it come down in like March? Do you know?
Yes, I think so. Uh-huh.
Did you take it down recently? Because it's not up, it wasn't up today.
I'm sorry?
The tent, it wasn't up, it's not up right now. Did you have it up earlier?
No, we don't have now.
Oh, okay, it wasn't.
Yes,
okay.
no.
Yeah, I
Just the
don't think
pictures
Irma
are
was
previous.
doing that.
Yes, it's now.
Okay.
Uh-huh. We removed after, I think so, in the first day this month.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, we'll move to comments. Comments from the board or the public.
Go ahead and start. I mean, I think I would be fine if there's approving this on a continual basis, not having to have this come back each year, but just approving it, saying every winter they can have their tent up for a maximum of 6 months, starting from the time that they want to put it up, although it has to come down by June 1st of each calendar year. So if they put it up in January, that's just to kind of set a cap on that. And just say the side panels need to be clear and let staff handle that. I also think we need to reconsider whether this building is contributing.
I do too.
But that might be for our discussion later on tonight.
Yeah, I kind of echo what Carl's saying. I think 6 months is a good time limit because I think, you know, you could argue that any more than that starts to become permanent because it's more than 50% of the year, right? I think that, I know Sherry asked about awnings, but I do see a difference in that awnings are typically attached to a building and therefore become more permanent. I think that, you know, from a preservation standpoint, you know, tents are reversible. It's you know, it's not a permanent structure that in the long term of a history of a building, it would go away. I think it certainly does a service to the city to allow for this type of structure so that the use of the building and the district is more popular. You know, I think the thing we do have to sort of struggle with is the one guideline that says tents are not appropriate in front of contributing buildings, which Carl's pointed out, you know, does this really count? But even said, I think that the sort of non-permanence of a tent structure, I can get over that.
Yeah, I do think this is a very specific use, and not necessarily applicable everywhere. If we were to approve this, I think that the terraces in front of those buildings lend themselves to essentially porch-like spaces. But I wholeheartedly agree that it brings more people to the district, more life to the street. I like this inclusion of a transparent side or no side, so that it contributes to the life of the street and doesn't become an opaque wall. And I think the suggested 6-month time frame is also a good one. It seems like tents pop up again for graduation anyway, and so it seems like it makes sense to include that in the allowable window.
Or if they take you down in March, they get a temporary permit for a week for graduation.
Right, a temporary, the 5 days,
Yeah.
that's not a problem. The seasonal.
Mr. Whitney, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I don't think tents are beautiful, but I think, you know, we're kind of used to them at this point, and I think it is beneficial to everybody to let more patrons use these restaurants year round. You know, especially in front of this building, I don't have any issues with letting the tent go into use. I guess looking at, maybe we do still need to look at a case-by-case basis. There's a verbiage about the tents aren't allowed on the downtown mall, and I do wonder if someone wanted to, you know, how we would treat that differently than West Main Street. But in this application, yeah, I don't have issues with it. I do think, as certain restaurants use them every year, that it would be nicer to see a permanent feature built, but that won't make sense for everybody, and, you know, will be dependent owner by owner. Yeah, so no issues with approving on a yearly basis.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one major difference between the downtown mall and West Main is that this is all proposed on private property, whereas the downtown mall is public space.
Well, if anyone's considering a motion, I just want to offer, one thing I'll say is when they asked me in the interview 6 years ago for this, one of the questions was, how do I see economic development and historic preservation, you know, living together? And I believe they absolutely are, you know, interrelated and connected. So I appreciate what you all are saying about that activity. I mean, old buildings are great, but if there's no one in those photos, then that's just a picture of an old building. So I applaud that comment. But Carl, you had mentioned allowing the recurring. The only thought I would have on that is that can we put some date on that, such that if the guidelines get revised, or if council wants something different, I don't know the legality of it, but would it is suddenly a tent is allowed ad infinitum? That's my only thought. Or under the current
Well, it could
design
be
guidelines.
administratively approved.
Yeah, I actually would be okay with administrative approval in perpetuity for the tent at this location. Would that satisfy that?
Except what criteria would I apply?
A good question.
I think it's okay if you said, you know, for a period of, since you're allowed to, the BAR, you're certainly allowed to put the limits on it, maybe say for a period of X years. I don't know.
As long as that they are the current owners?
For
Under
LPN.
the current BAR guidelines.
Well, those may not last very long.
Yeah.
Hopefully, they
Well,
won't
I
last
think
very
there's-
long.
I think there's a differentiation there. They may be the current owners of the restaurant,
But they're not.
but are you the owner of the building?
No,
No.
they are not.
Right.
Okay.
So that's.
Are
that's
the
a little-
current
That's different there.
tied to the current business?
But
You're the lawyer. I don't want to ask you for
No,
legal
I-
advice.
I don't have any offer. I was going to say I would actually extend it beyond the current business. I mean, I don't know how this restaurant or any of the precursor restaurants are any different in their need to use that outdoor space. It's handsome outdoor space. It's always been used. So I guess I wouldn't want to limit to just to this business. And also, you know, businesses come and go. I'm hoping that they flourish, but
I mean, perhaps,
I don't think
if-
that's
as long as
really-
there's no change to what we approve, they can
Yeah.
have administrative approval, be it, you know, fit a tent with no marquees or writing on it, clear or no sides, and a minimum of 6 months, or
Yeah.
excuse me,
Maximum
maximum,
6
excuse me,
months.
thank you, maximum 6 months.
Right.
And then if we want to go along with Carl's suggestion that it must be removed by June 1st. No
And do we
later.
want to specify white? I mean, what if it were a different color? I'm just asking.
That is that came up during COVID. People in law had asked, could we use clear tops? I think there had been one with clear.
Be okay with clear.
Clear or white?
Okay.
Maybe, and to address the constraint would be maybe simply reference the current terrace design placement. I don't know, I guess I'm thinking if somebody built a building there that was, you know, completely new and 5 feet from the curb and said, hey, I'm allowed to put up a tent. But somehow,
They'll come before us.
I think, yeah.
okay, fair enough.
If there's a new building.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to restrict to clear or white necessarily. There's a picture in the guidelines of a dark structure in front of Mauna Loco from years back,
enough.
and it kind of blends in because it's dark. So I don't.
The intent is a single color, and
Yeah.
that it doesn't become a sign.
Color to be administratively approved.
There you go.
There we go.
Are you following what we're saying, and does it make sense to you? Are you okay with a 6-month limit for the tent on an annual basis?
And that
Yes.
would be a period of when to your,
I would say 6 months starting when they put up the tent, but it has to come down no later than June 1st.
okay.
Well, it sounds like you
I,
want to have
go ahead and, yeah,
a motion.
if we're all happy with this. Suggest, oh, don't, there, okay. I hate the new Adobe Reader. Having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including ADC district design guidelines, I move that the proposed seasonal tent at 625 West Main Street satisfies the BAR's criteria and is compatible with the West Main Street ADC district, and that the BAR approves the application as submitted with the following conditions. We approve this tent to be installed annually for a maximum of 6 months from the time of installation. The tent must come down no later than June 1st of each calendar year. The side panels facing West Main Street must be clear. And the color of the tent shall be administratively approved. And the tent shall occupy the walled-in patio space in front of the business.
Second. Sorry.
I want to make sure that the suggested conditions all get included, including if I could offer the addition of tent installation will not alter the landscaping or site features nor be anchored to the historic structure.
Yes.
And you said some of this, but the tent will be a solid color without any text, signage, or logos, and no commercial signage will be installed onto the tent or suspended from the tent frame.
Yes, I'll accept that amendment.
And that side panels, the tent is also acceptable without side panels.
Yes, yes.
I might add one other thing. When you look at the images on page 100, there's a tent that appears to be a tent on some kind of a panelized box system. Those panels that seem to be solid or either solid or sliding or something. But I would maybe steer away from that as well through the conditions. So maybe saying avoiding any kind of hard,
Rigid,
yeah,
avoid rigid side panels.
yeah, or
I think if they did, I mean, if it's clear, I think that should cover it. I know Public actually put a solid door in their tent, and it doesn't seem that awful, but or it's not a solid door, but it's an actual door as opposed to a tent panel. I don't, but it's got a window in it, and it's.
I guess from my point of view, the solid panels can be a little bit more of a safety hazard. The plastic screen, if it's blown away, then it's blown away. But the solid panels, well, there's also an aesthetic issue too. But a solid panel is a solid panel. It's either it's not going to be blown away. It's going to be coming down on somebody. It feels more like that image feels more like a mobile home kind of with a tent on top than the others. So I think just to Sherry's point, a tent's not just a tent, I guess, or we should make sure that there's some distinction.
I think I included these are just screen grabs from, looking up tents, sort of that faux fenestration. So when you say clear panels, you mean entirely clear, or?
I was trying to keep it simple.
Yeah.
I thought about whether they put windows in there or not, but I think, I mean, it seems like it would be simpler if it was just clear, but just the side facing West Main Street. I think they do that, right? They can just do a whole sheet of clear, whatever that stuff is, vinyl.
I think that would be, I would like to ask for that.
And then
And,
we don't even
and
have to worry
if
about.
it's not a possibility, they'll have to come back to Jeff
Yeah.
and ask.
Okay, so when I type it up tomorrow, most of this will make sense, but so the side panels facing West Main, at West Main, entirely clear,
Yeah.
and,
I would say all side panels. I wouldn't distinguish because that corner is very.
okay, all side panels, entirely clear, also acceptable without panels. And then the additions that Mr. Castier referred to. That's right. This is the ultimate in sausage making.
So can I,
Yes, ma'am.
but this is part of the discussion, why only the panels on the street are clear? Because the panel on the side, the parking side, for lack of a better word, the access to the public, the park and the public parking behind, that side is also visible from the street.
Well, that's what Brett just said.
Oh, sorry.
I think we just switched it to all panels.
Okay, so all,
Yeah.
thank you, I wasn't listening, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, good.
I also feel like then you can
I
see through it and
apologize.
see the building.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah.
You have a chance to see the building, yeah.
Do you have them all?
Yes. Accept those amendments.
I accept all those. I do not accept David's amendment, just because I don't think it's necessary.
Oh, the no.
No mobile home look.
Yeah, because I think
Nice try, David.
by calling for clear panels, I think we've done it, and there's not really a nice, easy way to
Fair enough. Keep it
to make that
So
an
do you
amendment.
understand you can't do that one? The
You
way
could
the
say,
doors.
you could say clear roll-up, something that's not so permanent, but.
I think
The ones with the fenestration also a roll up, so we're gonna
I
get,
don't,
perhaps this could be fixed with,
We don't need to.
yeah.
if there's, I don't know if this would need to be an amendment, but if there's anything in this application or subsequent 10 applications that are not in the spirit of this approval, then it should come back to us. The VAR, no?
Yeah, but is that,
I'd bring
that's
it
up to you,
to you
Jeff.
Right, I mean, he could determine that. Jeff could determine whether it violated the spirit of
That's right.
this rule. Okay.
Okay,
Did you have a second? Did somebody
Yeah.
second you?
I
Yes, there's a
suspect
second,
no
yeah.
more discussion, so apologies.
any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
That was complicated.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Boy.
It's a fish.
Who
Thank
would think
you
a
for your
piece of plastic would be that complicated?
Tent,
Oh, but it is.
tent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
the tents have been, I don't know, I think like the first couple of weeks I was here, it was out like, I don't know what, and then there's temporary tent, there's seasonal tent, there's revised guidelines, there's still copies of the old guidelines floating around. Yeah, it's been an adventure, so.
So not to muddy the waters, but I am curious about the two restaurants that do have tents up. Are those permitted? Did you give
So-
administrative approval for them?
If it's not contributing, then it is up by, as a, either a temporary tent or a seasonal tent. Now, the question
I think
is,
it's
Not
contributing.
sure. Yeah.
yeah, seasonal tent's
It's-
not defined.
I think Oak Cart Social, the front of that, I think that is
Why can't
contributing.
I think of Oak Cart Social?
It's next to
It's
Clip.
right next door to us, too.
Yeah.
We looked at it.
It's super Clip.
It's between the Cork and Shenanigans. There's that block right there. So Public, Oyster House, and then it has a setback. Yeah, yeah. It's a
Guess you
really
gotta go
funky
out
Art
more.
Deco
Usually
car
people
repair shop.
are, I'm pretty good, people are pretty good about telling me about tents, so I don't know. That's my answer. And I will,
I happen to be assigned to West Main, so.
The Oak Park building looks like it's
so I
non-contributing.
know which
Oh,
one.
that's interesting. But we've done
What? So what it
The Oak Park building,
is not?
well, hold
How
on.
about Public Seafood?
so if you look at.
Public is.
No, I was in the wrong block.
Yeah, there we go.
The Oak
But it's
Park
actually
Social
not in
should
front
be
of Public, it's
contributing.
in the building
It's
next
in
to it,
Yeah.
which may be a newer addition or something.
No, it's
There's the
contributing.
connect-
to
the
that.
connector
A
is, yeah.
connector, yeah,
It's
between that and Oak
Yeah,
Park,
so
it
the-
is.
Up on the
Okay.
screen is what is contributing. The bottom map is the most up-to-date, contributing, non-contributing.
That's a very spotty map.
Yeah.
varies, yeah.
Okay, so the last other business item on our agenda is preliminary discussion for 915 East High Street.
And Dan's here, and Dan, you want to take the mic, and again, I know we don't want to, I don't want to eat the clock, just saying what's unnecessary, but this is a development within the Martha Jefferson Historic Conservation District, somewhat different set of rules and guidelines than you would have for an ADC district or an IPP. And the challenge there is that while the guidelines go from several hundred pages for an ADC district to 2 pages for a conservation district, I think the most important thing is to, one, look at this design and in context. This is, and I told Dan, this is a tremendous amount of work for a preliminary discussion. We usually don't get something this solid to start from, so but it's still sort of to at least have something on the canvas to begin to talk about. For example, the design guidelines would say, they say new construction should be the prevailing height. Well, that would suggest this be 2 stories. It does also, the guidelines also say, if warranted, the BAR may consider 200%. I will say also this gets into where the new zoning, which was approved last night, once everything sort of gets put in place, would allow a 10-story building at this site. So it's not a single-family detached house. This is a building within a neighborhood of single-family detached homes. You all in 2018 reviewed and approved a a 240-foot-long, I think it was 3 or 4-story residential project across the street over on Maple Street. When I say across the street, I mean across Lexington from here. As I mentioned earlier, the 3 things I raised were that height of the building immediately adjacent to the historic single-family homes on Lexington. The second being the break in the building somewhere. And in fact, the new ordinance will require a maximum building width of 175 feet. So there is, and it's that whole idea of not having a monolithic block, that there's some break there. Now, that would not necessarily be, a break that goes all the way through to Locust, but it's some discernible break in the facade of the building, and it may simply be back to the parking garage, which is contained within the building. And then the third piece is to look at what are the elements that the Martha Jefferson neighborhood identified when they established the district. And I think it's important to state that the historic conservation districts, the character defining features came from those neighborhoods, and Martha Jeff was the first neighborhood the whole reason that conservation districts were created was because of their effort to do this. So they have identified some things that are character defining and that they request be considered or incorporated into new designs. So I felt like the idea of porches and standing seam metal roofs, not saying and I mentioned it to Dan, is not to mimic them or something phony, but maybe in some way that gets as an element that's considered. And then the other piece is the landscape. Now, these are set back from Lexington Street, so they maintain that streetscape. There are overhead power lines there, so street trees, we're not going to see giant trees there. There are landscape elements that are prevalent in the district. There's a lot of those low stone and concrete curb walls and sidewalks. So, so not just the buildings, but the landscape. And then last is to say, as far as design elements, comments on that, what level of, or what types of, just with any other project, what information would you like to see presented so that, you're able to evaluate it fully as a, when it comes forward. It does have a face, in the conservation districts, we only look at what you can see. There's an element facing High Street, although the project is primarily oriented towards Lexington, but I don't want to forget about that. And then I know Mr. Gastinger, I shared with him, there were some questions from a resident over there that he can review for that discussion. So with that, if you have questions for me, I can answer them. Dan is here to answer your questions, and he may have some. And I don't know, is Ashley joining us, or?
Is she not on the call? She said she was going to join.
I do not see her.
I wonder if,
Remy's shaking his head no.
did we have a problem tonight with the link going out? Because I think
I
everybody had,
communicated with her
okay.
earlier today. But I do worry, sometimes.
She might thought we're a little bit ahead of schedule.
Well,
Well, if you're ready, you're certainly
Sure.
welcome
Yeah.
to introduce us. We have reviewed the materials, but it'd be great to get your introduction to the project, and then please direct us to any particular questions you have on top of what Jeff already introduced.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your time tonight. Preliminary discussion on this. I'm Dan Brazy. I'm partner at 2 Street Studio. Coincidentally, me and my 2 partners were both born at Martha Jefferson. All 3 of us were born at Martha Jefferson Hospital, and 2 of us grew up next door to each other on Northwood, and our parents still live there, so we're very much in the North Downtown community. Our aim with this building, it's a complicated site. It's, in a sense, sort of a dead zone along Lexington from a pedestrian experience. Not great. Parking lot separated with landscape from the street, long stretch. The other side's the cemetery, so we're not, you know, on the long Lexington facade, you know, we're basically in a dead zone there. And one of our big goals with our design, particularly on the landscape front, is to sort of create a much more activated streetscape along that side of the building, and also maintaining the 2 of the 3 current vehicular access points for the building, and also fully hiding the parking structure inside of the building. Jeff, if you could go to the,
Sending a note to Ashley, asking, where are you? Okay. How do I make it bigger? Talking to myself. So go through the,
yeah, this is a good
All those-
spot here. Just
Others
pointing
for
out,
the public.
you know, Jeff's report had obviously a very thorough rundown of the historic contributing structures, but more thinking about this building from the scale and surrounding larger buildings, just pointing out a couple of things that weren't super clear in some of the material, which is that the former Martha Jefferson buildings, 4- and 5-story buildings on the north side of the site, including a parking deck, are all immediately adjacent to single-family residential buildings. These aerial images don't show the new Centara building on the corner of East High and, I guess, 10th Street there. And then the relatively recently approved 3- and 5-story office and residential building across Lexington, also flanking the southernmost 4 houses on Lexington. And then 920 East High, which is the Centara building I mentioned, and 820 East High, which is the building the Bushman Drive Center, all. And then, of course, the existing office building in Patterson Wing are all sort of buildings in a scale that we're, you know, trying to stay either very close to or lower than in height. The building itself, 192 residential units, associated amenity and support spaces, and single-story commercial space facing East High. And all of that is fully wrapping a multi-story parking deck that's going to serve, the idea is that it will serve both the residences and the office building in the old CFA building. Jeff, if you could go to the site plan, I think it's page 5.
is that it?
No, a couple more slides.
That's 5. These done. You tell me, keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Thanks. This is, these images are just showing some of the juxtapositions of larger and smaller buildings already existing in the area. I think the next slide, Jeff, would be maybe one more after this. One more, I think. Just to there's a site plan slide.
Okay.
I can speak to some of why some of these images are in. I mean,
There. That's
well, yeah, that's great. So, jumping on to just sort of our initial thoughts on landscape. So, one is almost all of the ground floor units on the Lexington Avenue side have exterior porches with stairs down to grade, and then we're terracing down the grade to create flat sort of front lawns with walkways out connecting to the Lexington Avenue sidewalk. One thing that's not clear in this plan is the buffer between the street and the sidewalk, but it is would be in our intention and shown in a later revision. And then providing as much sort of planting buffer as we can on the north side of the building. Our current design, our building is 73 feet from the single-family residence on the north side. There's in the other site plan, the separately owned property that's the sort of the other half of the old Martha Jefferson site. The north half also has a strip of property that runs to the Lexington side, which I think is the Taylor's Walk sort of piece of that property that is already currently very densely vegetated. So there's quite a landscape screen existing, and we plan to add to it on that side. The concept on the Lexington side is to try to break down the scale both in landscape and in the facade of the building to feel pedestrian friendly and also be referential to the single family homes that continue down Lexington. On the East High side, the building, the 5-story portion of the building comes back at a 90-degree angle, and then the 1-story commercial building follows that diagonal line and provides, a pretty significant relief on the facade on the East High side, and then also creating an outdoor patio space for potential coffee shop, restaurant use on that side to further activate the East High stretch. Jeff, if you want to continue.
And I just might say, we can get back to some of this stuff in questions, so I just encourage you to kind of like hit the high points.
Sorry, first time. These are just images with some of the landscape inspiration and sort of very schematic section of showing what we think the street section out to Lexington would look like. We probably move ahead to the elevations.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you can just move to, I kind of hit most of these dimensional points, but this is just showing some context in section 2 surrounding buildings. We're lower than the existing buildings on the Martha Jefferson sites, and providing pretty good separation, horizontal separation from other smaller buildings. These are some precedent images for our facade design, which is taking a rhythmic grid and breaking it down and punching for windows and balconies, and then providing various types of fenestration and treatment within the grid to break those down to a sort of very human scale. And then using natural materials, largely brick, and different textures and colors and patterns. I think, Jeff, you can just keep flipping through these.
I think you probably want to get to
Yeah, exactly. So our sort of current design for the facade is breaking down the building both in scale with our fenestration and with doors and windows and brick colors and patterns and textures to sort of not make it feel as monolithic as a building of this length could potentially feel. I think that's probably as much as I need to say, and I think the whole point of this is for you to tell me what you'd like to see.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, assuming that there's still no members of the public, I would read into the record an email that we received from Paul Miller, which does include some questions, Dan, that you might be able to shed some light on. So, from Paul Miller, hello, BAR. Due to the holidays, I'm not able to attend the meeting. 3 comments and questions regarding the proposed development on East High Street at former CFA. Number 1, what is being done to protect Taylor Walk and the historic home of Fairfax Taylor on the Lexington adjacent to the property? Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think we'd certainly have a landscape area near where Taylor Walk was. The actual Taylor Walk is not on this property, but I think we'd certainly be open to having a pathway through that landscape buffer that we have there.
And Fairfax Taylor's house, it's my understanding, is only
You speak up a little.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
The house is, my understanding is over on 8th Street, so I don't know if,
Yeah.
I didn't know if it's there on Lexington, so I will look into that, but I not, this project doesn't cross Taylor Street, Taylor Walk, as it's
Right.
called.
Okay. So it's-
there is a plaque right there that could
Yeah.
maybe. be
So it's fair to
used
say
for
that both the house and the walk are not on the property, but it'd be good for us to know. I'm not familiar with that or what all is signified by that walk. So that might be worth having a little more information on when we see the project in the future. We're continuing with Paul Miller's email. Within the design proposal, please comment related to stormwater management and tree canopy development, both of which should be better than the existing asphalt parking lot.
I guess, first from our roof is a part of the amenity space, both over the building and the garage. And there will certainly be some planted area on the roof that will capture some rainwater. There's also existing on the site rainwater retention system that will continue to operate. And then I don't have all of there's been a site plan submission that I think fully contemplates the rainwater solutions.
And third, from Paul Miller, does the NDS or city have any update on High Street Lexington intersection realignment? It's been discussed for years. Related, how can this new development contribute better to pedestrian and biking options along high streets in Lexington? We look forward to plans that will enhance this great location. Thanks, Paul Miller. Jeff, any response to any information on High Street Lexington?
Not that I can offer tonight, no.
Okay. Or
But
anything that you are aware of, or would you like to speak to that
I
second?
think I
point?
read a comment of his on a Facebook post related to this today, and I think there is I would say maybe a not great turn into the East High access point for this property. It's sort of at an angle and near an intersection. I think there's some relatively simple site plan things we could do to improve that. But maintaining that access point is important both for the office building and for access to this building.
I'll make one follow-up question I have just related to stormwater, tree canopy, some of the site questions generally, as if the project is seeking to attain any environmental ratings or either LEED or site.
That has not currently been discussed as part of this project.
Okay, thanks. All right, questions from the board or discussion points? We don't have the same structure as regular.
I have a question for staff. And I should know this since I'm on the planning commission, but I'm not entirely sure all that got approved last night. How much leeway do we have in adjusting setbacks and things like that? For example, the setbacks on this project are significantly greater than would be allowed by what I believe our zoning code is going to permit for an extent.
The only thing I know of that was discussed as far as council establishing some parameters was related to height.
That's what I thought.
And in my discussions internally, I very often said that, I'm using East High as the example, those two-story buildings set 20, 30 feet back. If you set something back and appropriately spacing, you could put 4 or 5 stories in there and you wouldn't notice, but you could build a single story up the sidewalk and it would look like an eyesore. So nothing changed last night that I know of relative to that, and I think that there is some language in there about that sort of prevalent setback, but I think it's something that's going to have to be explored now that they've now that they've approved the ordinance. I'll just say that staff, we kind of got to the point where, well, let's see what they approve, and then we'll go back in and become experts on it. So I can't give you any details.
I have a question for you about the set, it's a 30-foot setback? Is that what you were
There's
on Lexington?
The setback for the zoning for this site is, I think, I have to pull my document up, but I think it's between 0 and 15 feet. But what we're hoping to do is have a separate parcel along Lexington so that we can have that setback.
I'm assuming that 30-foot is the sort of typical that the rest of the houses have?
Yeah, very close to it. Yep.
So that's what this proposed lot 3, there's a project overview map, and there's a skinny lot that's called proposed lot 3 future use.
Correct.
So there's no intention on building in that
No,
lot,
but
right?
you know, if a projected front porch or some sort of feature like that, that would occur in that lot and be separate from this building.
Oh, that's interesting.
What is in the elevation and in the plan, there's a suggested sort of depth to the apertures, the punched openings within the brick facade. How deep are you looking at now currently, roughly?
They vary from just sort of a punched-in window that would be 18 inches recessed to a balcony that could be up to 6 feet.
Okay.
I mean, you say a front porch, are you talking about something that's totally covered, or like a part of the building that sticks out, or, and I guess to follow up with that, are you talking about a variety of these kind of working their way down? Or?
Yeah, that comment is sort of more in response to having read Jeff's, comments on having a projected front porch, which, from our initial designs didn't really feel sort of stylistically correct with the building. So it's just a suggestion related to that it is something we could achieve on the site.
I think there's a lot of the, related to that, a lot of the precedent images are really attractive, and I think they are at their best when there's really quite a nice depth to that gives a lot of additional shadow, and given that this is a west-facing facade, that depth would be welcome. Anywhere we can get it, even if it means sacrificing some of that 30 feet. I mentioned that because we've seen a number of projects in the past come forward with aspirations of having a deep facade, and it just seems like as the design advances and the costs come in, and it just keeps getting shallower and shallower, and it ends up quite a difference from where we initially started. And just encourage ways to find depth both within the individual bay, but also in what I'm sure will come up is in ways of distinguishing or differentiating the different portions of those step downs and that middle section, if that's what continues forward.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by the strategy, and you might even, I would be accepting to think of the front porch as part of the landscape itself, right? It doesn't have to be if you don't feel like it works with the architecture, being able to designate a special exterior space as a front porch is wonderful, really. And I agree with Breck that the images are really encouraging, the exterior landscape images. The one, I think...
Dave, could you just make sure, for notes and everything else?
Yeah, we're sharing this, so... I think, and then I also think that the willingness to, reflect the rest of the street is a really good thing, because it's such a strong street, and you want to continue that pattern as much as you can. I think that that location lends itself to a place where you should be able to find some really interesting meshing of sort of the commercial district and the residential, and so really look forward to seeing how that gets reflected in the architecture. My criticism would be that I think looking at the building itself, it looks pretty monolithic to me. And while the precedents were very intriguing, the sort of depth of the windows, the oversized windows, and the some of the different, I just caught glimpses of the brickwork and the differentiation that was being set up through those material ways. The elevation just appeared to me very blockish and not of that language. So,
Okay.
look forward to seeing a language in the architecture that speaks to the ideas you have in the ground plane and follow through with the street and some of these other issues of reinterpretation of the native architecture of the street.
Okay.
Other comments from the board? Any, go ahead.
Just, I'm going to agree with David on the Lexington side does seem, it's extremely long, which I think is, yeah, you've got a lot of things working for you on that, but we'll see what zoning does to it. I don't know how it's going to work with your, it's a very interesting thing that you've done with that 30-foot lot that I didn't pick up on. So I'm not sure what that's going to do for how you are required to break down that facade as far as zoning is concerned, but I think with, at least from my point of view, I think the depth and the variation of materials and colors all seem to be doing a whole lot of really good things, but because it's repeated so many times, it still becomes a very long building. So if there's some way you can try to break that down so that it's not one giant building, but feels maybe, I know you're trying to make it look like 3 buildings, but if there's something else you can do to make that work. The greenscape you have between the building and Lexington, I think, is going a very long way in helping you with that. But yeah, I just would like to see some way of modulating the building a little more. I also and I know you guys are, it's conceptual at this time, but just paying attention to the sidewalk on East High, and it's currently very small, and it's awful holes in the middle of it, and I don't know if that space that you've provided in front of the building is a privatized space, or if it's going to be all blended with the sidewalk, but just kind of thinking about that as a future, more pedestrian-friendly public realm. Yeah, it's my big comments on that. I think you've got 50 feet to the parcel line, 73 feet, I think you said, to the building that's north of this. You've got it looks like a heavily landscaped buffer in between. To me, going from 2-story house to 4 stories with that buffer, I think that feels appropriate to me. So I think I'm okay with that. I know it's one of the items Jeff wanted us to look at.
Just to clarify, it's a point against point of interest, but it's 5 stories there.
5 stories.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay. Looks about double the height of the little building you had in your diagram.
Any other comments, or especially about massing? If there's any particular current concerns about the strategy that they're employing here?
So I walk by this site pretty much every day, and would be quite excited to see a new project go in lieu of the parking lot. There's, quite a few taller buildings along High Street right there, and do not think it would be out of character for the mass. The one facade on Lexington is quite long in comparison to really anything else in the city, but I think that there's been a lot of talk of that setback, and I think I think you've done a lot with pushing the building back, and it's really pretty well aligned with the neighboring houses to the north. So I think it's in the right place. And there was talk of the overhead power lines, but I'd say that street has pretty good tree coverage right now. So, everything you can do to continue that, which I think you have set in the schematic plan of in that setback in the front porch area, keeping the trees there and planting anew, I think would do a long way to break down that massing of the building. And I think the reality of the situation is that nothing's going to get built in the cemetery, so that, you know, it's not going to feel canyon-like it might on Main Street, because a good amount of that long facade's going to be
Right.
open on the other side. See, I think everything that I see in the schematic design does a good job of trying to break down with the deep porches, with the, you know, crenellations in the facade. So, yeah, I'm excited to see this at a schematic stage and think it would be a good addition to the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Here's a question. Y'all showed a lot of different, I guess, they're bricks in terms of range of color and orientation of the brick. Is that your intent, to really shake it up that way across the whole facade?
Potentially, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
that's
I
sort of
just
our
think we've also
first
seen,
pass.
we've seen a lot of projects that come at this stage. Oh, we've got all these different color bricks and everything, and that always gets like VM'd down. And
Right.
so I think I applaud you for going for it. And
Yeah.
you know, I think that diversity of brick, whether it even, you know, whether it stays at 20 or gets down to 10 or whatever, that just helps break up the facade. So keep it up.
Great. Thanks.
I'm in agreement with all those comments. I think it is a really long building, and I think we're going to continue to look for those strategies that help break down the masses. One, maybe slightly counterintuitive one, but I think that could be appropriate, is actually adding height on High Street if that was desired. I think that actually could be taller, and having more height variation across that facade would break down the mass. And so maybe I don't know if the one furthest to the north could come down, and the one, but I feel like if there were more height variation across that facade, it would help.
I agree.
Great.
Any other questions that you want to make sure we weigh in on, or at
No,
this
I think
point,
you've
you've got
kinda
what you need to move forward?
covered what we need to move forward.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Dan, thanks. I was just, someone had asked me about Fairfax Taylor's house a month or two ago, and I'm trying to find the folder of it, but it's at 528th Street is the Fairfax Taylor house, so it's the northwest corner, above the northwest corner of Maplewood Cemetery. And there was a Taylor Street, in, you know, pencil line in some of the old maps, so the Taylor Walk. And I couldn't find I know the Historic Resources Committee placed a plaque there, but in talking about the life of Fairfax Taylor, in fact, he's buried at Maplewood, but the house that was associated with him is over on 8th Street. And certainly
I think that's the major part of our agenda. Turn it over to you, or do you want to guide the conversation about
I do.
guidelines?
If you allow me, I want to, couple things that I needed to, I'm sorry, I know some of us work with multiple screens. When you only have one, it messes with my karma here a little bit.
Totally sympathize with that.
If that's not the right word, I don't know. Let me open these two docs so that I can share my screen and ask you two quick questions on that. So, coming up here, this is 410 2nd Street. Most of you know it, Bill Lucci's house. It came to you all a couple months ago, and here on the left is what was approved. It was to build that addition on the back. gonna have the pergola and porch on the roof deck above. So I've got this, would be the south elevation and the east elevation, which is at the back of the house. The architect called me the other day. They're looking to do a little value engineering, have eliminated that pergola and porch, the railing, and this new dormer raised it a little bit, and then at the back of the house, here, the revised back. Those, I honestly don't have any problem with, and more than happy to, that's when something's an addition and they remove elements of the addition, I don't have a problem signing off on that. The other change, another change was there's a vent at this end, in this gable here. The question was to replace that vent, and because this space is, I assume, being developed for use, put a small window in the place of the vent. My response was that it's, as long as it stayed within that space, sort of it fit within the existing trim, I was willing to consider that. The other piece was, sorry, there's a thing on my screen but not yours. So right where this purple is, they want on both sides of the house, and this is onto the existing roof, install skylights. I would have suggested to, put them on the, the back side, but I don't know. It's not intrusive. I've even considered putting them on mine if I could. So, and then there's just some slight variation down the bottom here with some of the railing, and I think they've added a transom over the door. But they're looking to submit for their building permit, and want to know whether this had to come back to you all. I don't think they need to show skylights on their building permit, but certainly the change on the roof line would want, I wouldn't want them to submit something, and I don't think replacing a window, into a vent opening has to be shown on the building permit drawing. So, really the big question would be if you all are comfortable with the elimination of that deck and pergola above and the changing of that gable on that new dormer. I'm willing, like I said, that to me is not substantive, but the skylight and the vent to window, not so sure. But
Concerns? Anybody?
any thoughts?
I just think it's funny that the two things that I probably wouldn't have noticed are the two that are of concern, but yeah. I mean, I understand why.
Right.
But just.
I mean, I could see the skylights if they would function on the rear facade. That would be preferable over that facade is quite visible from the street, but I don't know how the house is, if that works or not.
Mostly because there's a parking lot in
Yeah,
back of the
exactly.
Stedman
Yeah.
house or whatever it is.
It's now, whatever.
Yeah.
Actually, I know
So you
there's
look
some
up to the
significant landscaping in the back that, for all the accolades we had offered it, an awful lot happened in the backyard that I wasn't aware of. So I'm quite comfortable with these are the sort of changes. It's an addition. They're value engineering it. This is not controversial. I'm okay with these. I just wanted to clear that with you. All right, thank you. The other one
Good.
that I need to ask about, and I'm going to be 61 in
Was it the locust
2
one?
weeks, and I'm so frustrated with how confused I am by technology. It's really starting to bother me. I have Breck walk me home and make sure I get into my house. There it is.
I won't be doing that tonight.
So, this is an interesting one, and actually, it's next door to Melanie. So, some folks just bought this house. It is, when you zoom in, it's beat up. It's not as rough as condition my house was in, but it's pretty beat up. Just about everything they've talked to me about on it, removing the vinyl siding and adding hardy plank, replacing the windows, these are clearly replacements. Working with them on that, put on a new roof, conservation district. I have no idea what this was. I assume it used to be metal, but honestly it looked like tar paper. So, yeah. So the question they had, the two things I wanted to ask you all. I don't know if you can see right here, there's a chimney. They want to drop it. There's from the front. There's nothing really in the conservation district that talks about what to do with a beat-up old house and how to address it. So the guidelines are really written, again, in the sense of if you want to build a new house or do an addition, something to think about. But so to me, I mean, it would, if nothing, you would look to, is this a character defining feature? I don't, in a conservation district, I would say no. The other question they asked me is, can we replace the railing? Absolutely. Please, I'll come and help. What I am going, I've advised them is, but, you don't have to do a custom fabrication of anything. There are some similarly aged houses nearby. Pick one, find an appropriate, and working with me, find something appropriate. Does that sound reasonable to you? And then this feature here, they actually think might have the spindle work. It might be buried underneath plywood. We can only hope. But what I caution them is, well, if it's not there, my question would be, I looked at, there are 20 1890s houses. Sorry, I know I keep flipping my. There are 20 1890 houses in the district. Only 6 of them have the spindle work. So I can't say it's prevalent, but so if it's not there and no evidence of it, what's that?
What do the others have?
The others have, they do not have spindle work.
So, but is it the same depth? Or is it just go straight up to the underside porch?
Right.
It's also possible.
Is there some sort of,
On the other building, on the other houses
Yeah.
that do not have spindle work, no, it just goes up and
Goes straight
there's
up
a
to the
column
building.
or
The
different
reason
types.
I ask is,
Yeah.
the reason I ask is because you do, on the subject house, you do have that depth, and so I think you've got
Could
to.
you go back to the subject house?
Do
Make
they
me
want
dizzy
to
again?
install if they don't have it? Is that the question, Jeff?
So the
Sounds
question
like
is, one, like some of the other houses have brackets, but some don't. But I said to them, if you pull that off and the spindle work's there, great,
Right.
But if it's a mess, possibility it is, would we, if this were on High Street or Second Street, it'd be a very different evaluation
Yeah.
of restoration, preservation. But if there's evidence of what's there and it's in lousy shape, I'd be comfortable with, you can find things that are available and at least representing it. But if there's no evidence that there was ever spindle work there, I would probably ask them not to install something.
I kind of feel like that's the thing with this being a conservation district is it makes it hard for us to tell people what not to do. I mean, if they wanted to put cable rail up on the front porch, I'm not sure we could say no.
Right.
And if they wanted to cut out their own gingerbread, scroll work, whatever stuff they want to put up in there that has nothing to do with the style of the house, I struggle with.
That's exactly
Not
the
sure
question.
We can encourage them.
Right.
Right, but I'm not sure we can tell them no.
That's exactly the question in sort of taking it out of this house.
We
I
scroll
s-
down
if-
slowly.
I think if they are interested, they're going to be diving into this house and
You want the other-
it sounds like they have an interest in restoring it. That pointing them to the Secretary of Interior's guidelines would be a good thing. And
Absolutely.
even if it's beyond, it may not be what we require from what's VAR.
They seem
That's
willing to, but I haven't, it's some of you all may know the city now has everything online. You can file everything online. Molly and I are still catching up with that. This was one that kind of came in and, oh, shoot. So, I haven't had much of a conversation with them, but they appear willing to work. You know, they're really interested in doing it right, it sounds like. But they're taking on a lot here. I mean, so when you zoom in, the house is in rough shape.
Yeah,
So,
I think Breck's right. The Secretary of
Yep.
Interior standards, you know, outside of any sort of historic district are still best practice when you're restoring a historic home. And I do think that they would probably discourage conjecture and putting something here that wasn't there or that you don't have proof was there. I think that with a little bit of investigation, you could scroll down to the next,
Yeah,
to the
I was
other
gonna say, can you go back to
properties
the historic?
slowly. Next one maybe.
that's it.
Okay, so what I was looking for was to see if any of that spindle work actually abuts the columns or the posts, which in those examples, it doesn't look like it does.
They
But-
do, and then the bracket is below.
Yeah, okay. So my point is, you know, there's a decent chance you're gonna see potentially some
Right.
profiles in the paint ghosts, if it is indeed underneath there. So it's certainly worth some investigation. I think Breck's absolutely right to point them to the Secretary of Interior standards.
My thing would be is that if there's evidence of it, but those things are shot in a conservation district, I wouldn't be comfortable saying, we want you to replicate what's there.
That's right, but we also, I don't think we should encourage them to replace it with something different. Like, perhaps don't do anything.
Well, I think there's a difference between encourage and, advise and then require.
Agreed.
So, yeah, I mean, and I trust Jeff to encourage the right
You'll be
things.
very encouraging.
Yes.
Including
Yeah,
and I mean, it seems like this would be a good tax credit potential, no?
Depends how much they want to do.
Not a primary residence.
It would be. Tax credit projects are not simple. And, I mean, there's a reason I wasn't able to take advantage of them. And I'm in this field. So they're not the simplest tool out there. But I certainly can speak with these folks about it. I think, having experience on my house, there's a lot I can help them with. Replicating or duplicating or representing a feature that's not there now is where, so we're good on the fireplace. What I'm going to say to them is open that thing up and let's see what you got. And, but at this point, there's an awful lot that they can get going on and they don't, I give them the green light tomorrow and they'll,
Can you go back to
Start
the
spending
image
their
one
money.
more time of 524? So the most interesting existing element I find in this is the transom over the door. And I don't know whether, I don't think that trim, I'll call it a trim, on the porch is original. Because you wouldn't necessarily want to cover up a nice transom like that.
right.
And it would also be there for light reasons as well, to let light into the interior. So I have to say that I don't think that it's original. I don't know what was originally there, but, I mean, it could be that there were different posts entirely there.
I wondered that,
I just
posts
don't
seem-
think that you would build it, I mean, for a
Yeah.
very I mean, it might be not a modest house once you uncover stuff, but to add a transom over the door and then sort of half cover it up.
I think he's suggesting that perhaps that's either replacing or covering up some of those little spindles.
Well, the spindles would allow the lights through,
Correct.
that's what I'm saying, yeah. Or there were no spindles, but it was a different setup completely.
Well,
But-
But looking at it, it doesn't look like there could be, it looks like it's just a board.
Yeah.
There aren't any spindles underneath that board.
Well, I think what Jeff suggested is there
think
could have
there
been
are.
plyboard on
they
each
think,
side.
which is odd, usually you
Yeah.
rip stuff out, not cover, spend
Right.
money covering it up, but
Right.
that's what they believe they are beneath that. And
Take
Really?
a look.
yeah,
All right.
So this is great, thank you.
I mean, the leisure board is it's way above the transom. I mean, it kind of,
That's right, but when you look at those
What,
other
it's-
examples,
yeah,
that's why,
yeah, the other ones are.
whether
and
they're
this-
there or not. I
All
think
the
they
rest had
probably were.
transoms as well, except for one, and the other one, if you wanna go back to it, there's one, and I'm guessing there was a transom over that one.
Yeah.
Because they have the porch is high above that door.
I didn't see anything anywhere that has this sort of depth of a beam, if you will, so, all right.
All right,
Thank
let's,
you.
yeah,
Move
let's
on.
keep going.
That's fun.
Thank you guys for being so patient. I lost.
Is it homework time or deferring our homework to January?
When it's,
2-minute break while I find my piece of paper that I had on my notes.
Sure.
so we can do a time check now, about how long you guys want to allot to this. We have 8 districts to go through, and then, perhaps some general conversation afterwards. Previous email suggested kind of 5 to 7 minutes a piece. Does that puts us at certainly 45 minutes. Well, 30.
Since I completed my homework, do I need to talk?
Just give us a
You
second.
you gotta fit it in that time period. So maybe I'd suggest at the most an hour to this conversation. Okay.
The goal being, and Brett and I talked briefly, and I know we've all had a lot going on, is, my thought was, all right, well, if I kind of give everybody, give each group a, whatever, team, say, hey, come on in, tell us what you see, what you think, just sort of establish some ownership, maybe, but what I really, 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 really would like to do is discuss with you all, hear from you all, using this format that I've come up with, that we've come up with. What's the best way to talk through them? Are there things missing? What would we suggest? And since Ron did his homework, I'm going to start. Open up the Oakhurst.
Ron goes first. Does that mean Ron gets dismissed first? It's
Good.
like,
Oh, good.
so long farewell, au revoir, Wiedersehen.
Is that what? I never
Is-
knew that's what
As
the
soon
other
as we
words
do
were.
our presentations, we can leave. Da, 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 da,
Is-
da.
This
Remember,
is
there are snacks and libations.
I know.
Well,
Will that still be available at 8:15?
Yes, there will be.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, what I thought would be helpful would be for each person to go through and describe very briefly what the current description is, what's either correct or wrong with it, and major changes that would be necessary in an improved depiction, and then ask for brief additional comments. Does that sound okay? Can we get started, Jeff? Or is there a magical document that has the answers that you're
It does. I have, we don't even have to have any screen up, or I can pull something else. I thought it'd be helpful to work from the documents, and what I do is just open them all.
The map will be helpful.
Yeah.
And then, now, which one would you like to start with?
Should we go in order from the guidelines or what?
I don't even know which one's number one.
Starting with downtown.
All right.
Let's go downtown.
Um, can get the map up.
Should I time people?
Actually, can you time me, please? I might go long, and I really did bullet
Don't go
points.
long.
That's a lot of running.
How many minutes do we want people to talk? 4, 3?
So
Warning at 3?
3, that's at the max 5, and then maybe a couple minutes for any additional.
And the idea being, you've got a description, it doesn't matter what's on here, really, what did you all see? What do you all think? And as Breck said, you know, what's there that's not expressed in this, in the guidelines, or what are some things that we could think about, talk about?
All right, well, so first thing with the downtown district is I think we need to work on the boundaries of the district. The Main Street sub-area F needs to be with West Main Street. The northern boundary of the Market Street sub-area doesn't seem to make any sense. I think I understand the logic of what they were doing, but I don't like the logic. It either needs to just cut through halfway through the block north of Market Street, or just cut through halfway through Market Street, one or the other, and give the rest to North Downtown. Because, I mean, it leaves out the block that has the second yard and the wine shop, which that seems very much tied in with downtown. The library, I think they were pulling institutional things out, so we didn't have to talk about deep setbacks, but again, I think it's important that we recognize that the park is part of Market Street, that the library is part of Market Street. And then I have a whole long list of buildings that I think we need to make non-contributing, but the problem with that is I think the reason they're contributing is to extend our district out. For example, in the Vinegar Hill section, the only building I think in there that has any historic value would be the where the livery stable is. We've already approved the demolition of the Artful Lodger. The Omni isn't historic. The courthouse isn't historic. The brutalist thing at the old bank building. I know we've got some people who love brutalism, but
We do?
well, we did. But then if we end up, what does that leave us with? Do we even have a district in that? Can we still have purview over that area if we take those buildings out of being contributing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there are, I mean, there's whole stretches of West Main that are not contributing. So the idea is that it falls within your review for the only thing that a contributing structure designation means is if they want to knock down the Omni or the courthouse or this brutalist building,
Right.
that you all would have to review it.
I guess my concern is you end up with a large swath of land that doesn't have contributing structures in it. Is it still, so just to make sure that's not a problem, but that would be my suggestion, is everything that's in that Vinegar Hill sub-area is non-contributing. Similarly, a lot of stuff on Market Street, we've got Guadalajara and the Lucky Seven are listed as contributing. City Hall, this parking garage, same thing with when we get to Water Street, or the Water Street parking garage. Why are they contributing? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, Carl, you had raised this before, so some of you know, the ordinance said everything in the district was contributing. The ordinance now will say what's contributing is what we establish on our maps.
Okay.
So I think that the idea that the BAR has purview is that idea of good design, and design is complementary of that district. So I don't think that changes things, but I agree with you. If something's contributing, then what's the reason for it being? Now, as much as there are buildings that probably shouldn't be contributing, there are likely some buildings that in the last 20 years have become considered for contributing.
Yeah, and I think that's another discussion we probably need to have, is where do we set the...
Well, let's identify the discussions we need to have, but not have the discussions.
Right. So, and I think we need to have a discussion about what is do we have a cutoff where we need to look at buildings and determine whether they're contributing? I would say, right now, we've got the 50 years, or do we say 1950? I'm not saying everything after that has to be non-contributing, but I think we need to at least look at them all. Market Street, I think the way we describe it's going to depend on how we end up actually setting that boundary, because I do feel like we need to move the boundary. The library, the park, Second Yard, they all contribute to the district, but they're currently not part of the district.
30 seconds.
Well, great. Let's see. Yeah, I've got some things that we can add to each of these districts. Like the mall, we should talk about the lighting. We should talk about the pavers and the fountains. West Main Street, the street trees, the consistent pedestrian lighting. I think I'm out of time, but it's sorry.
There has been discussion of the mall itself as an individual district relative to what guidelines apply, so that has been noted.
Generally, I think we need to focus these descriptions on the contributing elements. So there's things listed in a lot of these descriptions that are things that, like the parking lots. I'm not sure we should list that as a contributing feature of these areas.
A way to think of this, I go back to something Tim Moore said a couple times when we had, and I think Workman Street would be a good example. He said we should, before we even start reviewing it, establish what are the design elements that are important, what are the preservation elements that are important, what are the things that we're going to use as the filter in viewing that project. And so yes, that's exactly what these should be, and not telling us that it has large empty parking lots, unless that's something we want to really make sure that we preserve. So,
right.
Any other components that we want to make sure would be part of the future homework for North Downtown that weren't mentioned yet? I would say the park, the description of open space. I mean, maybe, I don't know whether it happens within the district or separate, but I think those would be both the mall and the park need some description that's otherwise left undescribed.
And I would even go so far as to say that it's not just the library and the park, that maybe it's that whole block that gets contained. You talked about rerouting the boundary to include some of those buildings, but I almost feel like downtown sort of stops at maybe High Street, but certainly Jefferson.
Yeah.
Well, and even if it doesn't go north of Market Street, we also have the Haven, so there are some institutional buildings that have some green space around them. So that was lacking in the description of Market Street.
Okay. Which one's next?
North Downtown.
Okay. I think that's me, unless somebody else also did it. But okay. North Downtown has I think an odd description, to say the least. But I think the most pertinent pieces of the description are that they served as the earliest civic, religious, and commercial center. That there's a lot of architectural integrity remains. And though I don't just agree with maybe the sentence, but which could be updated today, this represents the socio-economic and architectural evolution of the original town. There's a lot of, I think, missing. There's in the descriptions they talk about in some of the sub areas that there's a mixture of quote unquote a mixture of styles, which isn't really helpful language. I think there is a mixture, but it's not an infinite mixture. I think it would be helpful to describe some of those styles that are present or that repeat. I think they may have been suggesting that maybe the future development would allow for a mixture of styles. I think that's still possible in the description. There's very minimal description of the landscape elements that are important to this district, whether it's, I think that we could add more description to there. I think Court Square is really underserved described as an area. And I think in the same way, I think that the boundary of the sub area, or should be redefined to better reflect the Court Square as a district, sub-district. And there's no mention of, I included Market Street Park or Court Square Park. Those are clearly significant features within this district that bear some description. The part for me that doesn't fit, or I'm not sure quite why, what's the name of the big apartment building on Altamont, and then the couple of properties that are down on McIntyre Road that are kind of on the back side, the north side of the hill?
Yeah, I
Not sure.
can't think of the one, I think I always like 411.
I just don't understand.
The
There-
towers?
Yeah, the towers, yeah.
There's
But
the-
Al- Al-
yeah.
It's 511 North First
Yeah,
Street.
that's it, yeah.
Altamont's just called Altamont Circle, I think.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Altamont.
But there's three, the two down on McIntyre, right?
Yeah. They're non-contributing. I could see with the towers would have any work there would have a significant consideration on a historic district. The two down on McIntyre, I don't see what impact they have. And lastly, I think in this sub areas, Altamont Circle and Altamont Street I don't know enough about the history of those streets, but they seem like they warrant some description, and they're kind of left out. I thought it would be nice to note the impact of power lines on the tree canopy, and the district has been significant in North Downtown. Other thoughts or things that should be focused on in the future?
Did you mention that Park Street is not only residential?
Well, I thought that some of that might be the redefinition of the Court Square. Part of that. It does have the two large churches.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's residential. Yeah, I think that's a good.
Okay, it's just the churches.
Well, but closer to Court Square, their businesses there.
Their businesses and residential buildings. Yeah.
Park, which is First Presbyterian. Actually, some even across from there, the Ark is there, Hospice is
Oh, yeah.
Piedmont. So
Yeah.
you've got a lot up to almost, really up to Hedge almost, I think. Yeah.
Well, we probably ought to distinguish between what the architectural character is. The businesses and use may change over time. Probably will certainly change over time. Okay.
I think North Downtown is one where, you don't want to say more sub-areas, but it certainly has distinct pockets that could be
Yeah.
better explained. And in part of this, and it's certainly, this is longer down the road, but it's a recommendation to council of, do these boundaries, are they appropriate? And so shifting moving moving the boundary line is within, what your purview to make a recommendation on. So you don't have to make everything fit. If something doesn't fit, you can recommend removal.
So, just out of curiosity, we can move the boundary lines ourselves without asking the residents whether or not they want to have the boundary line moved?
Well, it's a recommendation that it occur. Council makes the decisions. So at some point, what you all would recommend, it would be done in a meeting where
Okay.
it's advertised, and it would go to council as something
Okay.
that's advertised, right?
Good.
What's next?
Ridge Street.
All right, it's me. Just like North Downtown, I thought the Ridge Street intro description was odd. I think that's probably the best way to put it, and kind of off the mark. It's basically three parts. It's referred to primarily as a residential street, and and I would not necessarily describe it as such. Most of the intro is a history that seems vague and kind of off the mark. It just felt like it was written by somebody that didn't have enough time, and they were just putting something in. And then the last line says, home ownership and infill are current trends, and this seems outdated, especially given the new elements that were put in on the corners, as well as the sub-district C. So the recommended amendments I'd make, just going strictly with BREC structure, I've got 3 or 4 points. I'd suggest the most important feature of the district is being the distinct nature of its 3 subparts. A, strictly residential, south of Cherry. The area is cut off from the main thoroughfare due to the street reconfiguration. I think it's important to note that. The subregion B is heavily trafficked, yet well-preserved context and texture between Ridge and Dice. I think that's really the key. The heart of the whole Ridge Street is subregion B. And then there's C, the predominantly commercial nature of North Dice. My second sort of general recommendation is change the first line of the description from residential to something along the lines of this thoroughfare originally a primary residential street, predominantly as a residential street. Now it works as a residential commercial hybrid, but with the majority of its structures at the residential scale and filled with many architecturally significant residential or small scale structures. So that kind of gives a nod to, it's very varying degrees from residential to commercial makeup. However, a description of the district would best be served by understanding the district's particular subregion, given each region's distinct and very different use, feel, and scale. Third point I have is more study on the brief history presented in the intro, which I'd be happy to do and be interested to do. It was the first time I've actually walked along Ridge Street, so it was just kind of a learning experience doing that right off the bat. A wealthy landowner street, they say, moved out of town, houses became rentals. Anyway, it seems like the history just is a bit not distinct. Oh, is that my
Sorry,
timer?
that was 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
You have 2 more.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, this seems outdated. One, because the nature of the 3 districts, this is not really relevant in the commercial district. It does not seem relevant in south of the Cherry section either. And then the second reason is that the current nature of the Ridge Street to Dice section seems much more rich than this. There's a lot more going on. I think just in walking up and down those 2 blocks, you notice that. So maybe the current trend is a combination, we might say, of single-family residential, structural preservation, small commercial adaptive reuse in historic houses, as well as new commercial infill. One other point that Carl brought up about the church on the corner, I almost, instead of that being part of West Main, I'd almost consider that being part of Ridge Street to sort of solidify that subregion C. And then the fourth thought I had was I think it's important to draw attention to the fact that the reason the street's 3 distinct regions involve some significant factors, North Dice being basically right in the city, also the rerouting of Ridge at Cherry, just noting these are sort of big factors in its current makeup. The fact that one side of it's right downtown and the other side of it was completely rerouted, or was completely blocked off due to the rerouting of the street. Just some tweaks to the subregion A I would make. I wouldn't call it a quiet neighborhood necessarily, maybe better described as a low trafficked and dead end street due to the rerouting of Ridge thoroughfare. And I would say it's currently described as having small to moderate, but there are some pretty large, nice, larger, significant houses. A couple come to mind. So I would change that. And then fairly consistent setback and neighborhood texture. And then the tweaks to subregion B is just call attention to the fact that this portion is so well preserved. I think we want to really illuminate that and highlight that as a kind of a gem of the districts that we're dealing with, especially given its close proximity to downtown. And I think we really want to, make sure we try to put any kind of language we can to preserve that one stretch. And then just call attention not only to the architecturally significant houses on that stretch, but also the consistent setbacks as well as the, older street trees and the older walls that exist there too. And then just for the next steps, like I said, I'd be happy to delve in a little bit more of the history of that stretch, as well as just rewrite the intro.
I think one of the things we'll see, now curiously at the north end here, I think these two houses are some of the oldest in town. They're dropped down below the road. They're really easy. They're forgotten, but they're fascinating houses.
What are they being used for?
I'm not sure.
One is vacant and the other one is an inn, the yellow one.
So
It's not really below the street. The only one that's below the street is the, I know the name for it, but anyway, used to know the name for it.
So I
The
think
one
it's,
that's,
like
I think
Gianninis, the Gianninis seem to live all over town. So, and I think there's the realization that, certainly we know the change that's happening at Salvation Army. This is obviously a piece of land that's all of this here. So one of the questions is, again, thinking in terms of not what the new zoning will do, but that when you see places that we know are going to be under development pressure, then what guidance do the guidelines offer when something's being considered there? So, and it's the difficulty is you've got this really unique late 1800s homes down at the other end, but how do they inform design guidelines for the new buildings that might go where Nolan's is? So just a way to think about it. Next.
Well, I'll just make one quick comment, is that topography plays a big role in this district, and this happens several places in Charlottesville, but it makes for you're right that the setbacks are consistent on each side of the street, but they're very different on the opposite side of the street because of the topography. Like on the west side of B, it's higher and everything is elevated above the street, and the same on the east side of A. It's a big factor in where that street wall is.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And it's a ridge.
And I would also offer that Oakwood Cemetery and Daughters of Zion Cemetery might be considered as extensions of this district, somewhat the way Maplewood plays into Martha Jeff. Just a thought.
the dead zone,
Yeah.
the developer referred to tonight.
Who's next? Julia?
West Main Street.
Oh, that's me, West Main. So I get an F on the homework because I left the back of my office, but I did do it, so riffing off of Carl's copy. Interestingly, and I'll tell myself, this district, it's basically a quarter, as you know, and a few adjoining streets, but it is not that challenged except for at the train station bridge. It's not that challenged by topo. It's a relatively flat street that's the three notch that connects. I don't really have a problem with any of the descriptions, although the last sentence says the character of this historically mixed use quarter exhibits much variety in the type age scale, you know, it's one of those
Mushy.
throw-in things, like, has lots of different architectural types, who cares? But I also think that mixed use within the context of certain, one property means different uses, you know, residential and commercial in one. I think what it's trying to say is that there are lots of different uses, but it's just kind of like a misnomer word in there. So this last sentence, I think, should be redone or thrown out. As far as sort of a survey of the three sub-areas, A is that from 10th Street all the way up to 14th Street, at the far left, far west. And interestingly, this area closest to the university has changed probably the least of all the sub-areas. There's been an addition of the Lark. We already had the Draftsman in these photos, so the Draftsman already existed, but there aren't a whole lot of new structures in that sub-area, interestingly. I mean, it encompasses sort of the far eastern part of the corner, so not much of that has really changed up to 10th Street. So that part is not all that different. It's a mix of those, you know, the Dinsmore beautiful homes, the Baptist Church, the Pavilion 11, 12. It looks like something from the lawn. You know the name of it, University.
The bank.
Yeah, the bank, University of Virginia Credit Union. But much of that is the same except for the addition of the Lark. But you get into sub area B, which is the middle area, and that's the area that is the canyon, with the standard on one side and the flats on the other. Wide sidewalks that have been required probably by the city of the developers, but very few street trees, very little vegetation, you know, just a bad street wall. Like, it's really makes you kind of, to drive from A to C, I mean, psychologically, when you're in that canyon, it's really depressing. And then you finally get to the point where there used to be a bakery shop. That's my 3 minutes. The bakery shop, anyway, the big parking lot on the north side, right before the train bridge, next to what used to be, you know, on the other side of Latoile. Whoever, I think, I won't mention who the owner is, but that's the big vacant, that's a very large possibility, a big vacant space there that's still, you know, considering development in that sub-area. B has not happened yet. It's still sitting there vacant. And then you cross the bridge, the railroad bridge, but also near the train station. And then sub-area C is also like A. There isn't a whole lot that has changed. I would say the Quirk is a major addition to that area. And as we get closer to Ridge McIntyre, I noticed a lot of the properties are vacant, which means, like we talk about the train station, the Centel building, CenturyLink building has now gone to another company. The old Quality Cable Xfinity building is vacant. Just a lot of maybe waiting for redevelopment on that far end. And I know that's nothing in here, but it's just an observation that I had. As far as the descriptions for the sub-areas, I think A is fine. I don't know what Cobra Head lights are. I didn't see any in A, but I might have missed them. Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, that was in C. It's me, yeah, I don't think, I didn't see any, that's in C. B, the description's fine. I don't, you know, I would say that, I think the description in B has to be changed to note that there's very little, you know, vegetation. I mean, it's just a canyon. At 2:30 this afternoon, there was no natural light in that area, in the street at all.
I have to say,
I know we're close to the solstice, but still, it was depressing to come through there.
I was responding to a note you sent me the other day, and I never sent it, I never finished it, but I started out by saying I intentionally, you know, thought West Main would be perfect for you to look at because you would give us a really the unsullied truth about it. And it's,
I really regret being on the planning commission and voting for that zoning ordinance in 2003 and 5 to make the flats possible. I will say that is what my biggest regret of my public service career,
and I
to
think
be
that's,
honest. And then we approved it, and, you know,
but it really illustrates the tension of, okay, when the next thing comes, what is it about this landscape that's going to inform the design review? And I think in a lot of ways, this is the most difficult place to write something for. You said something, I absolutely agree. It was in C, it is that reuse of older buildings. They haven't changed much. And I think you're right, but we're seeing them adapted because they're not right for redevelopment yet. I think that will be one of the threats of how we are able to take these buildings and say, how can we allow continued use versus removal and reconstruction? And one of the things on West Main, as we go forward thinking about, is a lot of that is UVA property. Does it still need to be included? I mean, or UVA is not going to sell it back. So,
Well, I think I hadn't thought about it until you described it in this way, but you know, when you have a whole sub area that barely has any contributing buildings, you're like wondering. And really, to be honest, the reason why West Main Street is a district is because the street itself has history and it's connecting the significant historic resources of the city. And it could be, maybe part of the description is like what happens when that historic fabric wasn't protected. This is a kind of an exhibit of what happens. And but it still has a role in protecting both the university and downtown, and serves as a primary corridor of the city, and it could be improved in its future projects if it were to follow the guidelines that govern those districts.
So that is something to think about. And then the question I think came up here is something Carl had asked me many times. When we approve something that gets built, does that make it a contributing structure? You know, so how much do those buildings that were approved there in this work and in other districts, how much does that become something that we acknowledge or recognize in the guidelines? And or do we propose to council that they be contributing?
I want to make. I don't want to have this debate right now, but I do want to plant a seed that there was a time before our guidelines, and when there was no architectural conversation. However, new construction that was constructed under our guidelines does at least have meet a certain kind of standard and has been reviewed to be in keeping. And so I could make an argument or understand an argument that says it's contributing because it actually complies with those guidelines.
I have 15 minutes of power left. Who wants to?
I think this was the one that Breck had said you and Kevin were going to do. So I didn't do it.
Me?
Yes.
Which one was it?
Wortland.
Oh, so nobody did Wortland.
Yeah, this was I volunteered, and then Breck's revised list. So it would be Jeff and Kevin.
Okay. No Wortland tonight.
Well, I will then, let me just say my observations to this. It is on the National Register. Our contributing structures don't correspond with the National Register contributing structures. That could certainly be revisited. I think that I'm concerned that this is going to be where we see that 25, if you save 25 feet of the building, you know, you can build. I think this is where we're going to see the greatest pressure for that. And so we still have, the historic buildings are still there, but the sense of that place has changed because of the scale of the buildings and the modern buildings behind it. Now, we have shown with 1301 how the new and the old can be worked together. So, that's something to look at. But I think this is one that will be ripe for reevaluation of the boundaries. And we really need to think about, what's at risk here, maybe it's here and in Venable neighborhood as much as any place else. That's my 2 cents on it. So now what's the next one?
The corner.
All right, I had the corner.
No.
In terms of the introduction paragraph, I am curious. We talked at the pre-meeting a little bit about the term turn of the century and what century that means, seeing as we're closing quickly to the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. I want to do a little more research on the history of that it's been referred to as the corner since the turn of the last century. I was looking at a map that's from 1825 that there's a dot there that says something's corner. I can't tell exactly from the script, so it's curious just in terms of the nomenclature. But
Corey Barefoot wrote a book on
yeah, I know. I need to look at that. I think the overall boundary is really well defined. Pretty much can't really move because of the streets and the railroad track. I think that there's a little bit of room for adjustment in the sub-districts, namely, St. Anthony Hall faces both Madison Lane and Chancellor Street, but probably should more properly be in the Madison Lane district, sub-district. I think that in terms of the descriptions, the corner itself description is pretty good. I would probably remove colonial revival styles on the retail strip of the corner itself. There's really not that much colonial revival there. And then possibly add inset entryways. In terms of Elliewood, the parking structure, whereas it is a feature, I don't think it's something we necessarily want to highlight. Residential converted to retail, I think, is probably the strongest descriptor of the Elliewood district. The Chancellor Street description, I think, is pretty solid, though it does say no sidewalks, partially raised sidewalks, so that could be fleshed out a little bit more. And then Madison Lane, I think, is a good description. I would add hedges as a pretty predominant landscape feature along Madison Lane. I do think, in terms of our ruling on COAs, I think that in this particular overall district, really looking at them within their sub-districts is important. I wouldn't judge something on Madison Lane like I would on the corner. And I think this is part of a National Register district that's also combined with Rugby Road, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah,
it would be
it
good to
is.
look at that.
On the National Register, the boundaries are very different.
Yeah,
right?
wider. So, I don't think there's too much room for improvement on this one, but we could do some little bit of refinement. I got the map since it fell off the computer. If anybody wants to look or flip through this one.
Oakhurst Gildersleeve?
That would be me.
Oh, and just if I can interject,
My
it's
computer died.
38-32 Memphis at halftime.
The important things.
This is the map, okay? The description is pretty bare bones in the book that we have. If I had my brothers, I would draw the boundaries somewhat differently. Oakhurst Circle now is completely dominated by the Oakhurst Inn, which, by the way, makes the rest of the place look nice because he's really fixed it up as compared to what the other houses in the area are. It's a very disheveled area, basically. It's mostly student housing at this point, and a lot of the houses, except for Gildersleeve Wood, but on Valley Road, it's almost all student housing of some sort or other. The parking is in the front yard for most of these places. There are no sidewalks along Valley Road And I would, if I were redrawing the boundaries, I would get rid of at least half of Valley Road, because as far as I can tell, there's nothing of particular architectural distinction there, but other people's views may vary.
Is it kept so that if the university acquires the properties, that
I suspect that was malice aforethought, but I wasn't here for that decision. So, because the university is building right up to the boundary, I mean, right there, which also changes the character of that neighborhood in any sense that you're thinking that it's a residential neighborhood. All you need to do is look up and these giant brick buildings in the background there. And as I say, most of the housing along Valley Road and certainly along Maywood are again, disheveled student housing. I think the buildings may have had some distinguished past at some point or other, but they certainly don't show that now. Again, on Maywood, you can park on Maywood, but several of the houses, the tenants park in the front yard. It's just the way it is. There's this wonderful description of what was it? Magnificent Tudor Revival home off of JPA. You look at it, it may have been magnificent at one point or other. Again, the yard is a parking lot, and it really needs substantial maintenance if it's going to be revived in any way, shape, or form. So basically, the character of the neighborhood, the Oakhurst and Gildersleeve Wood are still, as far as I can tell, mostly, other than the Oakhurst Inn, are mostly still single-family homes and are fairly well kept up. But the rest of the area is actually pretty disheveled. It's not. If you were thinking about it, just a person walking up to me, what would we do with this? Well, I would go, well, maybe some redevelopment could help here. In any case, I don't know if I'm allowed to suggest redrawing the boundaries, but I would certainly get rid of the dead-end portion of Valley Road if it were up to me. And focus on preserving Oakhurst Circle and the Gildersleeve Wood portion of that area. So those are my particular thoughts on that. Though I've described what's there in my homework, just so some people would have some sense of what it is. Most of the housing is asphalt shingle roofs, that kind of thing. There's nothing. There are a couple of them with standing metal roofs, but it's kind of, as I say, sort of 1930s housing that's been repurposed into rental space for students.
Interesting.
I guess I think we should just be careful. Although it's disheveled, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not special.
I'm waiting to see what makes it special.
Okay.
As I say, Gildersleeve and Oakhurst, I can see what that is. The rest of it is kind of frame housing from the 1930s that are not particularly distinguished, in my humble opinion.
I'm wondering if it's, at some point, someone decided that it was important to preserve some portion of the single-family residential neighborhoods that used to surround the university.
I think
and why
that is probably what happened.
And they picked this as opposed to picking
Sage
Montebello or, yes, yeah, exactly. But I agree, it's, yeah.
Well, but that's the question, does that make it therefore something worth preserving merely because somebody decided that they wanted to hem in the university in some way or other? Is that of historic significance?
no, it's a strategy.
It's a strategy, exactly.
Well, I think there's some significance to some of the preservation along there. I think it makes sense just to tell the history of what that neighborhood was, in the same way that we preserve the houses in front of the Quirk and in front of 600 West Main, to again just say this West Main used to be very different from it is today, and, but yeah, I'm not trying to argue with you, I think I'm just trying to think it out myself.
I think it's an area that you need to know more about that history and
Mhm.
guessing in the district, and if that is also a National Register district, and there's a lot of work that came up in the conversation about the Stone House, so there's a significant amount of work that went into describing what that district was and its history, we just don't know it.
Is that little stone house, is that the one that's on Valley Road?
There are two really significant houses that are at the corner of Valley Road and another one just up from it on JPA that are well hidden back off of JPA.
That's a nice.
Those are two
Yeah.
that are not student housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to some extent, there are portions of this neighborhood that may have been, and this is one of the more recent, not recent, but more recent ADC districts that was established. But I know that there's that concern that by being in an ADC district, the city has some leverage to require maintenance and repair. We're just simply not staffed to go around and find all the violations of things. The Google Street View, you've all probably noticed, has been updated to this past summer. So, driving around, you are getting a very recent view. And I agree with Ron, there were some places I kept having to check if I was still in the district. Just wasn't quite sure what back there or what the reasons are. So I'm not saying there's not good reasons, but again, it's another place for saying what is it that we really fight for and can have an impact on, and so what's left?
What's next?
Last district, Rugby Road, U Circle, Venable. That's me. The district is quite large, but I would say that the breakdown that they have actually makes a lot of sense. And the descriptions are pretty accurate. The first district's U Circle, which is a pretty well-preserved district. It's 2.5-story houses predominantly. There's some larger apartment-type buildings or institutional student center-type buildings, but that it's got some pretty nice character, and it's wider lots. The next sub-district is Rugby and Grady. It's referred to as the Rugby-Grady Creek area. Interesting mix of, large houses and some really articulate, like 4-story apartment buildings that mix in. The Preston Court, or I always call it a Graduate Court building, is also in this district. Between Grady and Gordon, it kind of has a different feel than right up on Grady, but I think it's a good mix of that area has maintained a decent amount of character, and what's marked on the map as contributing. And then behind that is the next sub-district is Preston Place, which seems to have maintained its character as, actually being residential and not as much student housing. And then the next district is 14th Street, 15th Street, and Virginia Avenue. There's been a lot of infill along 14th Street, so that one really doesn't feel like it has as much cohesion as a unit. Virginia does to a degree, but even there it's getting a lot of infill. I don't know. The description doesn't even mention Venable School, which is kind of surprising. Which it is marked on the map as contributing. But I'm not sure what to do with a lot of those houses on 14th. I mean, they're older, but I wouldn't say it necessarily feels like a neighborhood, or like that they are tied together in much a way. Maybe some of that's from the topography that, you know, they don't feel all right next to each other. I don't know. And then the E sub-district is called the Gordon Institutional Area, which is kind of interesting amongst all of more of the housing to have the institutional scale buildings in there. So those seem to have been preserved pretty well. The F sub-district is 15th Street high density and is now the Grand Mark and the V, so that kind of, you know, stands on its own. And then there's a little sub-district that's G, that's right up on 14th Street. It's the parking garage building and then the one that steps in, the commercial building. It doesn't feel related to this neighborhood as much. I don't know if it belongs in West Main Street. I mean, it's kind of the corner, but I guess the railroad's a really good boundary for the corner, so.
Well, the description even says it might be more compatible with West Main Street.
Yeah.
But if you're defining West Main Street by being on West Main Street, I mean, it is not, so I don't know. I would be happy to lop it off of my district and give it to West Main Street.
Give it to me.
It does seem important as something that is contributing to one of the districts. I just don't know. It's stuck between three. It doesn't really have a home in anyone. So, in general, I think the breakdowns and the descriptions are pretty good. They could get a little more detailed. And I don't know what to do with all the infill and all the 14th Street kind of feels like a mix, but does anyone have anything else for that large district?
It's a big district.
Well, I think it would be a good one to nail because it's in some ways it's really indicative of the change that's happening in our city. It's one that's been, you know, bridged. Even though the infill is a evidence of its change of use over time, especially related to the town and the city, town and the university, and the growth of the university. I know that came up a lot in the press and court conversation, but that it's a that info will continue to be a marker of that district. But that doesn't mean it's not historic. It's still pretty important.
I think the planning commission, I'm not sure if council took it or not, but we definitely recommended increasing the zoning intensity in that neighborhood.
Oh, I'm sure.
More so than what showed up on the zoning map that went out a couple months ago. Because, yeah, at least, well, yeah.
I think there's some structures that aren't considered contributing that could be added. I noticed some on U Circle, some in the Gordon area. I don't know if it makes any sense to really go and try to take some off of the contributing.
That's fun.
There's an interesting little block between 14th and 15th. It's like 5 houses that are facing a sidewalk that aren't facing 14th or 15th that I'd always kind of wondered.
I think it's called a quad or something.
Is that, I would
Yeah.
love to know the history of why those houses were built.
At least one sorority like that.
Oh, Sadler Court?
Is it Sadler?
Is that what we're talking about? We're talking.
Just south of Virginia, there's like 5 houses that face kind
Yeah, that's.
I know them as like sports
I
houses.
think that's Sadler Court, isn't it?
Do you know the history of Sadler Court? What's Sadler Court?
I think it was somebody, not specifically. I know it's something that gets talked about a lot as something important to preserve and something to potentially emulate elsewhere in the city.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of the zoning discussion. I think it was, I think those were all single-family residences and not sororities and whatnot. I swear Jenny Keller said she either lived in one or one of her friends lived in one when she was younger. I could be making it up. I thought that was, I could have sworn she had some connection to it.
I made a note to find out.
Any other comments on that, or Jeff, did that help
I
get
think it does,
things out
and
on the table?
it's, it's crystallizing in my head, some things. One, I guess what I'm hearing a lot, and I hadn't thought about it this way, is that the importance of these sub-areas almost beyond the district itself. They really are, and so that when we relook at these guidelines, let's stop thinking about prevailing in the neighborhood or generally, and really zero in on, and it may be, I don't want to get too micro within the neighborhood, but that then becomes what's the guidance for things in those areas. I think that and this is something that came up over and over again with the zoning revision. There seems to be a misunderstanding of the BAR's role in new design. We've even had with the consultants when they were trying to, what do we call things? They just kept calling it historic review, and I said, well, but that's not the only thing we do. And I know I'm not on the BAR, but it helps to say we have those conversations. The BAR, and I used the bus station example the other day of, that we had a great discussion of what could go there. So I think there's in emphasizing what the guidelines advise for these vacant parcels, or this area F here, which is a big, I don't know, I guess somebody could drop that building and build new. Why does the BAR care about that? And then the preservation issues are, I think, in the neighborhoods. I know, Breck, you advise we don't want to write something that corrects or countermands the ordinance, but we know where the pressure's going to be, and we can think about those things. So it's that, why is new design and new construction when there's nothing there? What's the BAR's role in that? And then when there's preservation or a threat to an existing building, where do we dig our heels in? And I mean, one example I would offer is I think that we have storefronts, commercial storefronts on the mall in West Main that are pristine. I mean, Jenny Keller, she's talked about it, like, yeah, you almost want to go to them and say, what can we do to, have an agreement that you leave it at, don't change it, and then there's other storefronts that are, have just been beat up, banged up, and changed, and so there are some things that we could say, this is really an important thing. This here isn't so much. So we're going into next year, new chair, new vice chair. I don't know why we've had a downturn in applications in 2023. Some people have told me they're holding their breath until the new ordinance is written or approved. We shall see. But I do know now that the ordinance has been adopted, there's going to be a lot of pressure on me to get this guideline, the review and update of these guidelines moving. So hopefully when we meet again in 2024, I'll have a more robust plan for you than the current effort. With that, I thank you all. Wish you Merry Holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and all, and Happy New Year. And I really appreciated the past 12 months and your patience. And I suggest you adjourn and we can pick this discussion up in January.
Check out the North Downtown District.
Yes.
517.
There's a sub area in particular.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
With gratitude to our departing chair and vice chair.
Yes.
Well done.
Did a good job.